Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was supposed to be one of those easy, fun days. You know the kind. The ones you plan for weeks, just a girl's trip, something to break up the routine. Me, my sister-in-law, and my friend were all packed into my SUV, heading to Trinidad for this big quilting event they have every year. We were laughing, the radio was on low, and the coffee was still warm in our travel mugs. It was a Thursday morning, late in September, the kind of day that starts with a chill, but promises to be beautiful. The sky was that clear, pale blue you only seem to get in the fall. We'd been driving for a couple hours, following the GPS, just talking about nothing. Kids, work, the new patterns we wanted to look at, normal stuff. I was driving, my sister was in the passenger seat, and the other two were in the back. We were on this stretch of highway surrounded by these huge redwoods. It's a beautiful drive, but the trees are so tall and dense that even in the middle of the day the road can feel dark, like a tunnel. I'll admit it, I missed the exit. I was distracted. Someone was telling a story, and I just blew right past it. I cursed under my breath, and the GPS started that recalculating drone. The next turn to double back was onto Patrick's Point Drive. It's a two-lane road, narrower than the highway, and it winds through even thicker forest. The canopy just closes in overhead. Sunlight was coming through in little patches, these sharp beams that would hit the asphalt and then disappear. It was like driving through a strobe light. We turned onto the road, and the mood in the car didn't change. We were still chatting, trying to figure out how much time we'd lost. I was driving slower now, being careful, watching for deer or anything else that might dart out. The road curved, and as we came around a gentle bend, a long, straight section opened up ahead of us, maybe a couple 100 yards long. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, on the left side of the road, something stepped out from the tree line. My first thought, my absolute first gut reaction, was idiot. Some careless person just walking into the road without looking. My foot immediately came off the gas and hovered over the brake. I remember the feeling of the pedal under my shoe, the rough rubber surface, but in the second or two it took me to cover that distance. That first thought just evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. This wasn't a person. It was tall. So much taller than a man. I'd guess 8 feet easy, and it was just solid black, not like it was wearing black clothes. It was a matte, flat black, like charcoal. There were no seams, no zippers, no wrinkles of fabric, no definition of a jacket or pants. It was just a single, solid form, from its head down to where its feet would be. Its skin or fur, or whatever it was, absorbed the light. The patches of sun that hit the road didn't seem to touch it. It was like a hole cut out of the world. Its arms were ridiculously long. They hung down past its knees, swinging slightly as it moved. And it was moving. It had this long, smooth, powerful stride. It didn't hurry. It didn't look at us. It just stepped out onto the pavement and started crossing the road, from our left to our right. My car was quiet now. The talking had stopped. I could feel the silence from the other three, a pressure in the air. I was probably only going 25 miles an hour by then, just coasting, and we were closing the gap, 50 yards, 40. I could see its build now. It was broad across the shoulders like a heavyweight wrestler or a power lifter, thick through the chest and torso. There was no neck to speak of. Its head just seemed to sit right on those massive shoulders. I couldn't make out any face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a dark, featureless shape where a head should be. Its legs moved in these fluid, purposeful strides. It wasn't walking like a human, not exactly. There was a grace to it, a power that was unsettling. It covered the two-lane road in maybe 4 or 5 steps. It reached the other side, where the brush was so thick it was a wall of green. Ferns, salal, young fir trees, all tangled together. A person would have had to fight their way through, pushing branches aside, probably getting scratched up. This thing didn't break stride, it just stepped off the asphalt and was gone. It didn't push through the brush. The brush seemed to just accept it. There was no sound of cracking twigs, no rustling. 1 second it was there, its dark form a stark silhouette against the green, and the next second it had been swallowed whole, vanished. I finally pressed the brake pedal all the way down, and the car came to a complete stop right about where it had crossed. The engine was still running. I could hear it ticking, a normal, everyday sound that felt completely alien now. For a full 5 seconds, nobody said a word. We were all just staring at the empty spot on the right-hand side of the road where it had disappeared. The sunlight dappled the empty pavement. The forest was silent. Then my sister-in-law in the back seat. Her voice was a shaky whisper. What was that? It was like she broke a spell. My sister next to me let out a breath I didn't know she was holding. "Did you see that?" she said, her voice tight. "Did you all see that?" We all started talking at once, a jumble of panicked, overlapping sentences. It was so tall. It was black, all black. Its arms, where did it go? It just disappeared. I put the car in park. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, scared animal rhythm. I looked in my rearview mirror at my friend. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She just kept shaking her head slowly. "It wasn't a person," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "That wasn't a person." We all agreed. There was no debate. Nobody tried to say it was a guy in a ghillie suit or a bear walking on its hind legs. We'd all seen the same thing. And we all knew in that car, in that moment, that what we had just witnessed was not something that belonged in our understanding of the world. My sister was the one who said it first. The word that was hanging in all of our minds. Bigfoot. She said it quietly, almost like she was afraid to give it a name, but once she said it, it was out there. It fit. The height, the build, the long arms, the way it moved. It fit the descriptions. I looked over at the passenger side window, the one closest to where it had stepped out. The window was down a couple of inches. I had a sudden, vivid and terrifying thought. I could smell it, or I realized I had been smelling something. When it was that close to my side of the car, a smell had come in through the crack in the window. It wasn't a strong smell, but it was distinct. It was a mix of things, a musky, animal scent, like a wet dog. But underneath that was something else, something dank and earthy, like old soil and rotting leaves. It was a wild smell, a primal smell, and it was already fading from the air. I told them about the smell, and my friend in the back nodded vigorously. "I smelled it too," she whispered. "I thought it was just the forest." We sat there for what felt like a long time, just staring at the empty forest. The normalcy of the day was gone, shattered. The quilting event felt a million miles away, something trivial and silly. My mind was racing, trying to find another explanation, any other explanation. A prank? Out here, in a solid black seamless suit, moving like that, disappearing into that brush without a sound? It was impossible. The sheer unnaturalness of its appearance was what got to me the most. The solid, featureless black. The complete absence of any clothing, any gear, any humanity. It was a thing, a living, moving thing that looked like it was carved from shadow. I was afraid to get out of the car. The thought of opening my door and stepping onto that asphalt, of walking over to the edge of the trees where it vanished, made my skin crawl. What if it was still in there, just a few feet back, watching us? Those long arms could probably reach out and grab someone before they had a chance to scream. "We should go," my sister said, her hand on my arm. Her fingers were cold. I nodded, my throat tight. I put the car back in drive and eased my foot onto the gas. We moved forward slowly, all of us craning our necks to look into the woods on the right. The green was impenetrable. There was nothing to see, no movement, no sign. We drove the rest of the way to Trinidad in near silence. The easy chatter was gone. Every shadow between the trees looked suspicious. Every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me jump. We got to the event, parked, and went inside. We tried to act normal, to look at the quilts and talk to the vendors. But it was a performance. We were just going through the motions. We'd huddle together, and one of us would mutter, "Did that really happen?" And the others would just nod, our faces serious. The drive home was worse. It was getting dark by then. We had to go back the same way, down Patrick's Point Drive. Nobody said it, but we were all dreading it. As we approached that stretch of road, the straight section after the bend, the atmosphere in the car became thick with tension. I slowed down to a crawl. My knuckles were white on the wheel. We passed the spot. The road was empty. The forest was just a dark mass on either side. Nothing happened. But the feeling of being watched was so intense it was almost a physical pressure. I felt a cold trickle of sweat run down my back. I didn't relax until we were miles away, back on the well-lit highway. That was years ago. We've talked about it since, the four of us. The story hasn't changed. The details are the same for all of us. The impossible height, the solid black form, the unnaturally long arms, the powerful and fluid walk, the way it vanished into the brush without a sound, the wild, musky smell. I've tried to rationalize it. I've looked up every possible explanation. A bear? No. The proportions were all wrong. The walk was wrong. The color was wrong. A person in a suit. The movement was too fluid, too powerful, and the way it disappeared into that thicket. No human could have done that without making a racket. There's no explanation that fits. None. What stays with me, what really haunts me, isn't just the sight of it. It's the feeling I had in those seconds as it crossed the road. It was a feeling of profound wrongness. It was the understanding deep in my bones that I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to be seen, something that belonged to the deep old parts of the woods, something that knew how to hide, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it had chosen to step into our world. It didn't acknowledge us. We were irrelevant. It just moved through our space with an ancient, alien purpose. And then it was gone, leaving us with a memory that doesn't fade, a chill that never really goes away, and a single unanswerable question that I will carry for the rest of my life. Story 2. Okay, I'll try to capture that raw, shaken feeling. Here goes. It was the summer of 1963. I was 14 years old. That's the thing you have to understand first. I wasn't a little kid anymore, but I wasn't a man. Not by a long shot. I still jumped at shadows sometimes, still got that cold feeling in my gut when I had to take the trash out after dark. But what happened that night? It scraped all that boyhood right out of me and left something else behind, something colder. My dad was a quiet man, a mechanic. He didn't talk much about feelings or fears. Our thing was driving. On Friday nights, after his shift at the garage, we'd get in his pickup truck, a beat-up Ford with a smell of oil and old leather, and we'd just drive. No real destination. We'd cruise the back roads outside of Winnemac. The windows rolled down, the Indiana air thick with the smell of cut grass and damp earth. We'd listen to the Cardinals game on the AM radio, the signal fading in and out through the static. It was our ritual. It was peace. This one night, it was hot. Not just warm, but the kind of heavy, suffocating heat that makes your shirt stick to your back. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, a sound so loud it felt like it was vibrating inside my skull. We'd been driving for maybe an hour, just past 9 o'clock. The game was over, and the radio was just playing some faint country music we weren't really listening to. Dad was smoking a cigarette, one arm hanging out the window, the orange tip glowing in the dark. We were on County Road 450, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that cuts through some of the thickest woods in the county. There's a small one-lane bridge that crosses over Crooked Creek. It's an old iron thing, and the county had put a single weak yellow light on a wooden pole at one end of it. It didn't so much light up the bridge as it did cast a sickly, piss-colored glow that just made the shadows around it seem even darker. As we got closer to the bridge, our headlights swept across it, and that's when I saw it. Or, I thought I saw it. A shape, just for a second, moving out from under the bridge on the other side. It was big and dark, and it vanished into the tree line so fast I wasn't sure my eyes weren't playing tricks in the jittery light. "You see that?" I asked, my voice sounding too high in the quiet cab. Dad took a long drag off his cigarette. "See what?" "Something. Under the bridge. Went into the woods." He grunted, a non-committal sound. "Probably a deer. A big one." He slowed the truck anyway as we approached the bridge. It was just instinct, I think. A courtesy to any animal that might be thinking of darting out. We rolled onto the bridge, the tires making that hollow thump, thump, thump sound on the old iron grates, and that's when the smell hit us. It came in through the open windows all at once, a solid physical wave. It wasn't a garbage smell or a dead animal smell exactly. It was worse. It was like rotten meat left out in the rain for a week, mixed with the musky, foul stink of a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. It was so thick and so awful it felt like I was tasting it in the back of my throat. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth with my hand. "Jesus," my dad muttered, his own face twisting in disgust. He hit the button to roll up his window, and I scrambled to do the same. The electric motor whined, sealing us in, but the smell had already saturated the cab. It clung to everything. The truck was almost across the bridge when the yellow light above us flickered. Not a power surge flicker, but a dimming, like something was drawing the energy from it. And in that dimmed, jaundiced light, it stepped out from the deep shadow right at the base of the light pole, on my dad's side. It was standing on two legs. That was the first thing my brain screamed at me. It's standing up. It was huge, 7 feet tall, easy, maybe more. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was stringy, matted, and looked wet. Dark brown or black, and it was caked with mud and leaves. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick, corded with muscle I could see even in that bad light. But its face... God, its face is what I still see when I close my eyes. It wasn't an ape's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something in between. Something wrong. The brow was heavy, jutting out, and underneath it, the eyes. They didn't shine like an animal's. They were just dark, deep-set pits. There was no reflection, no life in them that I could recognize. It had a flat nose, and its mouth was just a dark line. It was turned slightly away, looking down the road behind us as if it had heard something. My dad had frozen, his hand still on the window button, his cigarette forgotten between his fingers. The truck was idling in the middle of the bridge. We were just stopped, staring. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the smell anymore. It was a pure animal terror that locked my lungs and turned my blood to ice water. My heart wasn't beating. It was just a frantic, painful flutter in my chest. This wasn't a story. This wasn't my cousin's wild tale from a few years back. This was real. It was right there, close enough that if my dad opened his door, he could have touched it. Then it turned its head. It moved slowly, deliberately. Its head swiveled on a thick neck, and those dark pits of eyes settled on us, on me through the windshield. There was no curiosity in that look, no anger. It was just an assessment, a cold, empty observation. It knew we were there. It knew we were trapped in this metal box on the bridge. My dad made a sound then, a low, sharp intake of breath. It was the sound of a man who has just realized the world is a much stranger and more terrifying place than he ever believed. He moved his hand from the window switch to the gear shift, his knuckles white. He was going to slam it into drive and get us out of there, but we had a dog in the back of the truck. Buster, a big mixed-breed mutt, all muscle and loyalty. He'd been asleep on an old blanket in the truck bed. The smell, the stopping, the tension, it must have woken him up. We heard a low, rumbling growl from behind the cab, a sound I'd never heard him make before. It was a vicious, promising sound. Then came the barking, frantic, sharp, explosive barks that shattered the silence. The creature's head didn't turn toward the sound. Its eyes stayed fixed on us for one more endless second. And then it moved. It wasn't a run. It was a lope, a powerful ground-eating stride that was deceptively fast. It went from a standstill to a full fluid motion in an instant, heading for the woods on my side of the road, and Buster lost his mind. We heard a scrambling, nails on metal, and then a thud as he launched himself out of the truck bed. He hit the asphalt and didn't even pause. He was a black and tan streak, barking and snarling, chasing that thing into the darkness under the trees. "Buster, no!" my dad yelled, his voice cracking. He threw the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The tires screeched on the iron grating as we shot off the bridge. He slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt on the gravel shoulder just past the tree line where they'd both disappeared. The woods were pitch black. The truck's headlights cut two weak cones into the void, illuminating the first few trunks, a tangle of undergrowth, but nothing beyond that. The barking had stopped. Not faded away. Stopped, as if someone had thrown a switch. The silence was worse than the noise. It was absolute, pressing in on the truck. The only sound was the ragged, panicked sound of my own breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the truck's cooling engine. My dad didn't say a word. He reached under his seat and pulled out a tire iron, a heavy L-shaped bar of steel. His hand was shaking. He looked at me, his face pale and grim in the dashboard lights. "You lock these doors," he said, his voice low and tight. "You don't open them for anything. You understand me?" "Not for anything." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He opened his door, the dome light flooding the cab for a second before he closed it softly behind him. I clicked the locks down, the sound absurdly loud. I was alone. I watched him, a silhouette against the headlights, as he walked to the edge of the woods. He stood there for a moment, the tire iron held ready, peering into the darkness. He called Buster's name once, twice. His voice was swallowed by the trees. There was no response. He took a step into the woods, and then another. The darkness swallowed him, and all I could see was the faint bobbing of his flashlight beam as it swept through the trees. I pressed my face against the window, my breath fogging the glass, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves in the hot breeze sounded like a footstep. That smell was still in the cab, that awful, rotting smell. It was in my clothes, in my hair. I felt like I was going to be sick. The minutes stretched out. 5, 10. It felt like hours. I was crying, I think. I didn't even realize it until I felt the hot tears on my cheeks. I was terrified for my dad. I was terrified for Buster. I was just terrified. Then I saw the flashlight beam coming back, wavering through the trees. He emerged from the woods, walking fast. He wasn't running, but it was close. His face was a mask of something I'd never seen on him before. Pure, undiluted fear. He yanked open the driver's door and got in, throwing the tire iron onto the floor with a clatter. "Did you find him?" I asked, my voice a whisper. He just shook his head, started the truck, and threw it into a violent, gravel-spitting U-turn. He didn't speak the whole way home. He just drove, his eyes glued to the road, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. The smell came with us. We drove all the way back to our house with the windows up, trapped with the stench of that thing. We got home. The kitchen light was on. My mom was waiting. She took one look at our faces, and her hand flew to her mouth. Dad went straight to the sink and poured himself a glass of water, but his hand was shaking so badly he spilled half of it. He was about to say something to my mom when we heard a weak, scratching sound at the back door. We all froze. My dad was the first to move. He walked to the door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. Buster was there. He was on his belly, dragging himself over the threshold. He was covered in mud and slobber, and he was panting, his tongue lolling out. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were deep, parallel gashes torn across his back and sides. They weren't bite marks. They were cuts, like from claws, long and vicious, slicing through his fur and into the flesh beneath. Blood was matted in his fur, dark and sticky. One of his ears was torn nearly in half. He collapsed on the kitchen linoleum, whining softly. He looked up at my dad, his tail giving a single, feeble thump. We got him patched up as best we could. He lived, but he was never the same. He was skittish, nervous. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, growling at nothing, his hair standing on end. He wouldn't go into the woods behind our house ever again. We never talked about it, not really. Not for years. What was there to say? We both knew what we saw. My dad, a man who believed in engines and wrenches and things he could see and fix, had seen it too. It broke something in him, I think. It stole his quiet certainty about the world. And for me, I'm an old man now. I have grandchildren, but I still don't like bridges at night. I still catch a whiff of something foul on the wind sometimes, a dead raccoon on the road, a pile of wet leaves, and my heart seizes up for a second, and I'm 14 years old again, trapped in that truck, staring into those dark, empty eyes. I know what's out there in the deep woods. I know it's real, and I know that on a hot summer night, it can step out of the shadows and look right at you. And the worst part isn't the smell or the size or the sound. The worst part is the silence that comes after. The knowing that you're not at the top of the food chain anymore, you're just something on the menu. And that feeling, that cold, gut-level knowledge, never, ever goes away. Story 3. That night, I was driving back from hanging out with some friends. We'd been at a buddy's place just outside of town, shooting the breeze and listening to music. Nothing crazy, just the usual college stuff. It was a cold January night, the kind where you can see your breath fogging up the air, and the roads were quiet. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, just me and my beat-up old Ford Pinto cruising along Piper's Gap Road. The radio was playing some soft rock station, and I had the heat cranked up because the cold was seeping in through the windows. I was tired, but not exhausted, just ready to get home and crash. Piper's Gap Road is one of those rural routes that cuts through thick woods, with trees crowding in on both sides. There aren't many streetlights out there, so your headlights are pretty much all you've got. It's winding and narrow in spots, and you have to pay attention or you might miss a turn. I'd driven it 100 times before, always at night after visiting friends, so it felt routine, but that night everything changed. I was getting close to Smith Bridge. It's this old wooden bridge that crosses a creek, and the road dips a bit right before it. The time was somewhere between 11:30 and midnight. I didn't have a watch on me, but I'd left my friend's place around 11, so it had to be in that window. The sky was pitch black, no moon that I could see, and the stars were hidden by a layer of clouds. The air felt heavy, like it does before a storm, but it was just cold and still. As I approached the bridge, I was maybe going 30-35 miles an hour. Not fast, but enough that I had to be careful. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead in 2 bright cones. Everything was normal 1 second, and then the next, something huge moved across the road. It happened so fast, but it felt like time slowed down. This thing, this animal, I guess, but I don't know what else to call it, leapt across the road in 2 jumps, not like a deer or a dog, but upright on 2 legs. It was massive, at least 6 feet tall, covered in dark, dirty grey hair that looked matted and thick, like it had been rolling in mud or something. The hair was long and shaggy, and it moved in a way that wasn't smooth but powerful, like each step was deliberate and strong. My headlights caught it full on, and I swear my heart just stopped. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I didn't scream or anything, I just stared, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears around here and they don't stand upright like that, not for long, and they're bulkier with a different shape. This thing was leaner in a way, but still huge, with broad shoulders and long arms that swung as it moved. Its legs were thick, and it covered the road in 2 bounds from one side to the other, and then it was gone into the woods on the left. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I remember the sound, or lack of it. There was no roar, no growl, just this heavy thud as it landed, and then the rustle of branches as it disappeared. The air in the car went cold, and I felt a chill run down my spine, like someone had dumped ice water on me. My stomach twisted into a knot, and I started shaking, my whole body trembling. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to keep driving, but my foot hit the brake before I even thought about it. The car slowed to a crawl, and I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands still shaking so bad I could barely turn the wheel. The engine was still running, and the headlights were pointing into the woods where the thing had vanished. I sat there for a minute, just breathing hard, my heart pounding in my ears like a drum. I could feel the sweat on my forehead, cold and clammy, even though the heat was on. I had to see if it was still there. I don't know why, maybe to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy, so I turned the car around slowly, aiming the headlights into the trees. The woods were dense, full of pines and oaks, their branches looking like skeletal hands in the light. I swept the area back and forth, my eyes straining to see anything moving, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the quiet rustle of leaves in the wind. It was like it had never been there at all. That's when the fear really set in. Not just shock, but this deep, gut-wrenching terror. I kept thinking, what if it's still out there watching me? What if it comes back? I rolled up the windows, even though I hadn't had them down, and locked the doors. My breath was coming in short gasps, and I had to force myself to calm down. I kept telling myself it was just an animal, maybe a big coyote or something. But I knew that wasn't right. Coyotes don't stand 6 feet tall and move like that. I must have sat there for 5-10 minutes, just staring into the woods, when I saw headlights coming from the other direction. It was my friends, the same ones I'd been with earlier. They'd been heading home too, and they must have seen my car pulled over. They slowed down and stopped right beside me, rolling down their window. "Hey, you okay?" one of them called out. I could hear the concern in his voice. I opened my door and stepped out, my legs feeling like jelly. The cold air hit me and I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. "I saw something," I said, my voice shaky. "Something big across the road." It wasn't a bear. They got out of their car and I could see their faces in the headlights. Confused, a little worried, I explained what I'd seen, stumbling over my words. I told them about the size, the hair, the way it moved upright. I kept saying it was like nothing I've ever seen, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. They listened, but I could tell they weren't sure what to make of it. One of them joked, maybe it was Bigfoot, and we all laughed, but it was nervous laughter, hollow. We decided to look around together. We had flashlights from their car, and we shone them into the woods, calling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" But it felt stupid. The woods were silent, and the only sounds were our footsteps crunching on the frozen ground and the distant hoot of an owl. We didn't see any tracks or anything. The ground was too hard with frost, and the leaves were thick. After a while, we gave up and stood by the cars, the cold seeping into our bones. I remember one of my friends putting a hand on my shoulder. "You sure you're okay? You look pale?" I nodded, but I wasn't okay. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those eyes staring back from the trees. The memory of the creature was so vivid, the way its hair moved in the headlights, the sheer size of it, that I felt like I could still see it out of the corner of my eye. We talked for a bit longer, but there wasn't much to say. They offered to follow me home, and I agreed, grateful for the company. I got back in my car, my hands still trembling as I turned the key. The drive home was tense. I kept my eyes glued to the road, jumping at every shadow. Every time a branch moved, my heart would skip a beat. I kept replaying the moment in my head, over and over, trying to make sense of it. When I got home, I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The image of that thing burned into my mind. The next day, I told a few people about it, but most of them shrugged it off or said it was probably a bear or a hoax. But I knew what I saw. I'd spent enough time in those woods to know the animals, and this wasn't one of them. Over the years, I've heard stories from other people in the area about similar things. Tall, hairy creatures seen in the woods, usually at night. Some call it Bigfoot, others just say it's something unknown. I never saw it again, and part of me is glad for that. But that one night on Piper's Gap Road left me with this lingering fear, this certainty that there are things out there we don't understand. Even now, when I drive down that road, I get a chill, and I find myself scanning the trees, half expecting to see it again, but I never do. It's like it vanished into thin air, leaving me with nothing but a memory that haunts me to this day. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will. All I know is what I saw, and that's enough to keep me wondering. Story 4. The plan was simple. My oldest son was coming home from college for his winter break. His Greyhound bus was getting into Reading around 10 p.m., and it was about a 3-hour drive from our place in Happy Camp. I had my 3 other kids with me, my 2 daughters and my younger son. They were all jazzed to see their big brother, so the mood in the car was good. We'd left around 7:30, right after I'd gotten everyone fed and bundled up. It was already pitch black out. Winter in the Klamath National Forest. The nights come early and they come hard. We were on Highway 96. If you know it, you know it's a winding 2-lane road that follows the river. It's not a highway you speed on, it's a highway you survive. Lots of curves, lots of blind corners, and on a night like that, absolutely nothing but the blackness your headlights can punch through. Traffic was light. I think we'd passed maybe 2 cars in the last hour. It was just us, the hum of the Jeep's engine, and the kids quietly bickering in the back seat over some handheld video game. My Jeep was a 2001 Grand Cherokee, a real tank. I loved that thing, felt safe in it. I had the heat on blasting because there was a real bite to the air. I remember my knuckles were a little white on the steering wheel just from concentrating on the road. The headlights were on bright, cutting a path through the dark. The trees on either side felt like walls. We'd just passed the 8-mile bridge. I know that stretch well. The road climbs a bit there, with a steep, rocky slope on the right-hand side going up and a drop-off on the left, down towards the river. I saw headlights coming the other way, one of the rare cars, so I flicked my brights off as a courtesy. For those few seconds, the world shrank to just the little patch of road my low beams could show me. It always feels like you're driving blind when you do that out there. The car passed, a flash of light and noise, and then it was gone. I reached for the lever on the steering column and pushed it forward, clicking my high beams back on. The world lit up again, and that's when I saw it. On the right side of the road, maybe 50, 60 feet ahead, there was what I thought was a big, grayish boulder. It was part of the rocky slope, just this large, rounded shape nestled against the dirt and stones. My brain registered it for half a second, rock, and moved on. But then it moved. It didn't get up like a person gets up with a push and a grunt. It didn't get up like a bear, all lumbering and heavy. It just unfolded. In one smooth, continuous motion, it rose from its crouch. It was so fluid, so effortless, it short-circuited my brain. My foot, which had been lightly on the gas, just came off the pedal completely. We started to coast. My mind was screaming, "What is that? What is that?" It was towering. I'm not good at judging height, but I know my Jeep. This thing was taller than my Jeep, a lot taller. 7 feet, easy, maybe more. It was just this massive vertical presence where a second before there had been a rock. It was covered in hair, long and shaggy, like an old matted rug. It wasn't brown like you see in the movies. It was a light grey, almost silvery in the headlights, and it looked wet or dirty. But the worst part, the part that absolutely froze the blood in my veins, was its face. Its head turned toward us as we coasted closer, and its eyes. They caught the headlights and reflected back this bright, piercing yellow, not like a cat's eyes. Bigger, wider, like a deer's eyes, but if a deer's eyes were filled with some ancient, cold intelligence. They weren't just reflective dots. They were glowing orbs, and they were locked right on me, right through the windshield, right into me. It was just standing there, completely still. Its arms were long, hanging down by its sides. The head was sort of conical, no neck to speak of, just these huge shoulders that sloped up to it. It didn't make a sound. The silence was worse than any roar could have been. It was the silence of something that didn't need to make noise to be terrifying. Time didn't just slow down, it broke. We were probably only looking at it for 15-20 seconds as we drifted past, but it felt like an hour. I could feel every individual heartbeat pounding in my ears, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I could feel the cold seep from the window through my jacket sleeve. I could smell the stale coffee in my cup holder. My brain was trying to file it away. Bear, man in a suit, weird tree, and every single filing cabinet was slamming shut. This was none of those things. Then the yelling started from the back seat. My daughter, the one sitting directly behind me, let out this short, sharp gasp that turned into a shriek. "Mom, what is that?" The other two started clamoring, their voices high and tight with a fear that mirrored my own. "It's looking at us." "Go, Mom, go." The sound of their panic was like a switch being flipped in my own body. The paralysis broke. A raw, guttural scream ripped out of my throat. I didn't decide to scream. It just happened. At the same exact moment, my right foot stomped down on the accelerator. The Jeep, which had been quietly coasting, roared to life. The engine screamed with me. The tires screeched for a second on the asphalt, grabbing hold, and then we launched forward. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just stared dead ahead at the road, my hands glued to the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my body so rigid I thought my bones might snap. All I could think was, don't let it be following us. Don't let it be in the road behind us. "Did you see it?" My youngest son was crying, proper tears now. "It was a monster. It stood up!" My other daughter wailed. "It was a rock and then it stood up." Their descriptions, tumbling over each other in shaky, breathless voices, just confirmed it. I wasn't crazy. We had all seen the same impossible thing. My heart was hammering so hard I felt dizzy. My vision was tunneling, the edges going dark, and I had to force myself to take a breath. The air felt thin, useless. I drove like a maniac. I took those winding curves way too fast, the Jeep leaning hard, tires squealing in protest. I didn't care. Every shadow in the trees was that thing, about to step out. Every stump was its crouching form. My eyes were darting everywhere, from the road to the sides and back to the road. I was panting. I don't know how long I drove like that. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. It felt like a lifetime. Then I saw the green sign for a rest area. I didn't even signal, I just swerved off the road, the tires crunching on the gravel, and slammed the gear shift into park. I killed the engine. The silence was sudden and absolute, and terrifying. For a second, nobody spoke. Then the sniffles and quiet sobs started again from the back. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I shoved the door open and stumbled out into the cold night air. I bent over, hands on my knees, and just tried to breathe. My whole body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shake that started deep in my core and radiated out to my fingertips. I was gasping, but it felt like I couldn't get any oxygen. The air was so cold, it hurt my lungs. I could see my breath pluming out in frantic white puffs. I looked back at the Jeep. The dome light was on, and I could see my 3 kids huddled together in the back seat, their faces pale and streaked with tears. They were looking at me, their eyes wide with a shared horror. I was the mom. I was supposed to have the answers, and I had nothing. After a minute, I managed to straighten up. I walked around to the back of the Jeep just to put the vehicle between me and the woods that pressed in on all sides of the rest area. I leaned against the cold metal of the tailgate, the chill seeping through my jeans. It felt solid, real. My oldest daughter rolled down her window. "Mom, are you okay?" I just shook my head. I wasn't okay. I was so far from okay. "What was that thing?" my younger son asked, his voice small. I finally found my voice, but it was thin and ragged. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." "It was Bigfoot," my other daughter said matter-of-factly, like she was stating the color of the sky. There was no doubt in her voice, just certainty born from sheer, unadulterated terror. It had to be. I didn't argue. What else could it have been? A bear? No bear stands up like that tall, that still. A person. No person is 7 feet tall and covered in gray hair from head to toe, blending into a rock face in the middle of nowhere. My mind kept replaying that single moment over and over, like a broken film reel. The headlights hitting the rock, the smooth, unhurried rise, the turn of the head, the locking of those horrible yellow eyes. The feeling of being seen, not just looked at, but truly seen. It wasn't a curious look. It wasn't a predatory look. It was an acknowledgement, a cold, ancient recognition that we were there, and it was there, and for those 20 seconds, we were in its world. It felt like we had stumbled into a place we weren't supposed to be, and we were being warned. We stayed at that rest stop for maybe 20 minutes. I couldn't stop shaking. Every little sound, the creak of a tree, the scuttle of some tiny animal in the leaves, made me jump. I kept staring out into the darkness beyond the weak glow of the rest area lights, half expecting to see those 2 yellow pinpricks emerge from the trees, watching us. I finally got back in the car. My hands were still unsteady, but the violent trembling had subsided to a fine, constant shake. I started the Jeep. We had to keep going. We had to get my son from the bus station. The normalcy of that task felt absurd, like trying to do laundry during an earthquake. The rest of the drive to Reading was a nightmare of tension. I drove with my high beams on the whole time, my knuckles white again. Nobody spoke. The kids were just silent in the back, probably as trapped in their own memories of those yellow eyes as I was. We picked up my son. He was all smiles, lugging his duffel bag, happy to be home. He got in the car and immediately sensed the mood. "Whoa, what's wrong with you guys?" he asked. We just looked at each other. "How do you even start?" "Hey, welcome home. We think we just saw a Sasquatch." We didn't say anything. Not then. I just told him it had been a long drive and I was tired. The drive back was worse because we had to go past the same spot. I gripped the wheel so tight my hands ached for days afterward. As we approached the 8-mile bridge, I held my breath. I flicked my brights off and on, scanning that rocky slope. There was nothing, just rocks and shadows. It was gone. But the feeling wasn't. It's never gone. That was over a decade ago. My kids are grown now. We've talked about it since when we're all together. Their stories match mine exactly. The gray hair, the impossible height, the way it stood up. Those yellow eyes. We didn't just see a shape in the dark. We saw something that should not exist, standing on the side of a road in Northern California on a cold December night. I still drive that road sometimes. I have to. And every single time, without fail, as I pass that specific stretch of Highway 96, just past the 8-mile bridge, my heart starts to beat a little faster. My hands get a little clammy on the wheel, and I can't help it. I always look at that rocky slope. Part of me is terrified I'll see it again, but a bigger part of me is terrified that I never will, that I'll spend the rest of my life knowing what I saw, and never having another soul besides my kids, truly understand the sheer, mind-shattering terror of that moment when the rock stood up and looked at us. Story 5. It was April of 1998, and I'd driven up to Table Mountain in Colorado to sight in a new rifle I'd just bought. I'd been saving up for months for that thing, a bolt-action .308, and I was itching to get it zeroed in. The weather was typical for spring in the Rockies, chilly in the morning, but warming up quick once the sun got higher. I remember the sky was this clear, pale blue, not a cloud in sight, and the air had that sharp, clean smell of pine and damp earth. I'd packed a light backpack with some water, snacks, and extra ammo, and I headed out early, wanting to beat any potential crowds, though honestly, this spot was pretty remote. I liked it that way. It felt like my own little slice of quiet. I parked my truck off a dirt road that wound up the mountain, grabbed my gear, and started hiking to a clearing I'd used before for target practice. The ground was still soft from the snowmelt, and my boots sank a little with each step, making this squelching sound that was the only noise besides the occasional bird chirping. I found my spot, set up a makeshift target against a fallen log, and started firing. The rifle felt good in my hands, solid, with a kick that jarred my shoulder just right. I spent maybe an hour or so adjusting the scope, shooting, checking the groupings, all that. It was peaceful, the kind of thing that usually clears my head. After I was satisfied with the sighting, I decided to pack up and do a little scouting around. I've always been into tracking, deer, elk, whatever, so I figured I'd see what signs were around. I slung the rifle over my shoulder and started walking along the dirt road, keeping my eyes on the ground. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a weird depression in the soil, maybe from a rock or something. But as I got closer, my brain kind of stalled. There, in the soft mud next to the road, was a footprint, but not like any I'd ever seen. It was huge. I mean, massive. I knelt down to get a better look, and my heart started thumping hard in my chest. The print was bare, no shoe marks, and it looked human-like, but way too big. I pulled out a tape measure I always carry, force of habit, and it measured 22 inches long, 22 inches. For reference, my own foot is maybe a size 10, so that's more than double the length, and it had 5 clear toes kind of splayed out, with an arch that looked almost exactly like a human foot, just scaled up. I stood there for a minute, just staring, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced through possibilities. Bear? No, bear tracks are different, more rounded, and they don't have that human shape. Maybe someone playing a prank. But who'd be out here with fake feet that size, and why? The soil was soft, and the print was sunk deep, like whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but it was just trees and silence. Then I noticed another one, about 8 feet away, and another leading down a slight hill and crossing the dirt road. The stride was 8 feet apart. 8 feet. I'm 6 feet tall, and my normal step is maybe 3 feet. This thing was taking strides longer than I am tall. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I followed the tracks with my eyes, and they descended the hill, crossed the road, and disappeared into the trees on the other side. The impressions on the road itself were visible too, not as deep, but clear enough to see the toe marks. I remember my hands getting clammy, and I wiped them on my jeans. Part of me wanted to just pack up and leave, but curiosity pulled me forward. I had to know what this was. So I started following the tracks, moving slowly. My rifle held a little tighter now. The tracks led off the road and into a patch of forest where the ground was still soft. They were easy to follow at first. Deep, clear prints that looked fresh, maybe from last night or early this morning. The air felt colder suddenly, and I zipped up my jacket, though I don't think it was the weather. It was that feeling you get when you know you're not alone, but you can't see anyone. As I walked, I kept glancing around, my ears straining for any sound. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of my own footsteps. I could smell the dampness of the soil and the faint scent of pine sap. My breath fogged a little in the cool air, and I remember thinking how surreal this was. Here I was, tracking something that shouldn't exist, and my rational mind was fighting with what my eyes were seeing. The tracks led me through a thicket of young aspens, their leaves just starting to bud, and then the ground began to change. It got rockier with patches of gravel and exposed bedrock. I slowed down, squinting at the ground, trying to pick up the trail, but the prints started to fade. On the soft soil they were unmistakable, but here, on the rocks, there was nothing, just scuff marks here and there that could have been anything. I spent maybe 10 minutes circling the area, my frustration growing. I felt like I was losing it, like this thing had just vanished. That's when the fear really started to set in. Up until then, it was mostly shock and curiosity, but now I felt a deep, primal dread. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept turning around, scanning the trees, expecting to see something moving, but there was nothing. Just stillness. I decided to head back toward the road, thinking maybe I'd pick up the trail again there. As I retraced my steps, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a hoax, I thought. But who would go to all that trouble out here? And the prints were so detailed, so consistent. When I got back to the dirt road, I saw them again. More prints, just like the first ones, crossing the road and heading up the other side of the hill. This time, they were even clearer, and there were multiple sets, like whatever it was had paused here. One print was perfectly preserved in a patch of mud, with all 5 toes visible, and the depth suggested a weight that made no sense. I estimated it would take something weighing over 500 pounds to sink that deep. I stood there, frozen, my rifle feeling heavy on my shoulder. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows, but I felt cold all over. My mind went to Bigfoot stories I'd heard over the years, stuff I'd always dismissed as folklore or misidentification. But now, faced with this, it was hard to deny. This wasn't a bear or a person in a costume. The stride, the size, the clarity of the toes, it all pointed to something bipedal and massive, something that shouldn't be here. I thought about following the new set of tracks, but my courage was gone, my hands were shaking, and I had this overwhelming urge to get back to my truck. I started walking fast, almost jogging, my eyes darting around. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud in the quiet. The hike back felt twice as long as the way out, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a huge, dark figure following me. When I finally reached my truck, I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb with cold or fear, I don't know which. I threw my gear in the back, climbed in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to process what had happened. The dashboard clock said it was only mid-morning, but it felt like I'd been out there for hours. I started the engine and drove off, not looking back. The whole drive home, my mind was racing. I kept going over the details. The 22-inch length, the 8-foot stride, the 5 toes. I thought about going back with a camera or bringing someone else. But something stopped me. It felt too personal, too raw. And what if I saw it? What then? I've been back to Table Mountain a few times since then, but I've never seen anything like that again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but I know I didn't. Those tracks were real. To this day, I can't explain what made them. All I know is that in April of 1998, I stumbled onto something that changed how I see the world, and I've never been able to shake that feeling of awe and terror. It's like a shadow that follows me, and every time I'm in the woods, I remember those prints and wonder what was watching me that day. Story 6. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, mostly because talking about it still makes my skin crawl, but I figure if I don't get it out there, it'll just eat at me. I'm a wildlife major at Texas Tech, and my buddy is too. We've been friends since freshman year, bonded over a shared love for the outdoors. For the past 3 years, we've made it a ritual to head out to this canyon in the Texas Panhandle every few months. It's our spot, quiet, remote, perfect for fly fishing and sometimes a bit of hunting if we're lucky. We know the area like the back of our hands, or at least we thought we did. This all went down on the last day of our most recent trip. It was one of those late autumn mornings where the cold just sinks into your bones. I'm talking bitter, biting cold that makes your teeth ache if you breathe too deep through your mouth. We'd camped out as usual, tucked into our sleeping bags in a two-person tent, but I woke up way before dawn because I couldn't shake the chill. My friend was still dead asleep, snoring lightly, and I figured why not make the most of it? First light was just starting to bleed into the sky, that faint greyish blue that promises the sun but doesn't deliver any warmth yet. I slipped out of the tent as quietly as I could, my breath puffing out in white clouds, and grabbed my fishing gear. The plan was to head upstream to this pool I've fished 100 times. It's a sweet spot where the creek bends and deepens, usually teeming with trout. The walk there was familiar, almost comforting at first. I've done it so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. The ground was crunchy with frost, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. I could hear the creek gurgling softly in the distance, and as I got closer, the sound grew louder, a constant, soothing background noise. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how this was exactly why I loved these trips. Just me, the wilderness, and the rhythm of casting a line. I reached the pool and started setting up my rod. The water was clear and cold, swirling around the rocks in a way that always made me feel calm. I waded in slowly, the icy water seeping through my waders, but I was used to it. For the first 20 minutes or so, everything was normal. I caught a couple of small trout, released them, and just enjoyed the solitude. The birds were chirping in the trees, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, all the usual sounds of the woods waking up. Then, out of nowhere, it all just stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second, the forest was alive with noise, and the next, it was dead silent. No birds, no rustling, not even the wind. The creek was still flowing, but its sound seemed muffled, like it was coming from far away. I froze mid-cast, my line dangling in the water, and that's when I felt it, this intense, overwhelming presence. It's hard to describe, but it was like every hair on my body stood up at once, especially on my neck and arms. My scalp prickled, and I got this cold sweat down my back, even though the air was freezing. I've been in the woods enough to know when something's off, and this was way off. It wasn't just the silence, it was this heavy, watchful feeling, like I was being stared at from somewhere close. I slowly reeled in my line, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the rod. That's when I saw the brush on the opposite bank start shaking, not like a gentle sway from the wind. There was no wind. This was violent, jerky movement, like something big was pushing through it. My first thought was that black bear we'd seen a couple days earlier. We'd spotted it from a distance, just a dark shape moving through the trees, and it hadn't bothered us. But this shaking was different. It was more aggressive, and it didn't stop. The branches were whipping back and forth, and I could hear the snap of twigs, which only made the silence around it feel even creepier. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could feel it in my throat like I was about to choke. I told myself to stay calm, that it was probably just the bear, but something in my gut was screaming that it wasn't. I decided to cross the creek to get a better look. The water was shallow enough there to wade across, so I did, my boots slipping on the slick rocks. The cold water soaked through my pants, but I barely noticed. I crouched down behind a fallen log on the other side, peering through the gaps in the wood toward where the shaking was coming from. As soon as I got into position, the shaking stopped, just like that. 1 second the brush was thrashing, and the next it was perfectly still. The silence felt even heavier now, pressing in on me. I held my breath, waiting, my eyes glued to the spot. Nothing moved. The forest was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. My muscles tense, my knees aching from crouching. Then, from across the river, back where I'd just been fishing, I heard it. a low, moaning cry that made the blood drain from my face. It didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard, and I've studied enough wildlife to know my calls. It was deep and guttural, but with this almost human quality to it, like a cross between a groan and a wail. It echoed slightly in the canyon, and it was close, way too close. My stomach dropped, and I felt this wave of pure, unadulterated fear wash over me. I've been scared before, once when I almost stepped on a rattlesnake, another time when a storm caught us out in the open. But this was different. This was primal, the kind of fear that makes your legs feel like jelly and your mind go blank. The cry came again, and this time it sounded like it was moving. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it keeping pace with me as I started backing away. I didn't want to turn my back on it, but I knew I had to get out of there. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling, and began hurrying downstream, back toward camp. The path was rough, littered with rocks and roots, and I was moving too fast, my panic making me clumsy. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything, just the dense trees and the fading darkness. That's when I hit a patch of slick rocks near the water's edge. My foot slipped, and I felt a sharp, searing pain in my ankle as it twisted underneath me. I cried out, more from shock than anything, and stumbled forward, catching myself on my hands. The pain was immediate and intense, a hot, throbbing ache that shot up my leg. I forced myself to keep moving, limping now, every step sending jolts of pain through my body. Sweat was pouring down my face, mixing with the cold, and I was breathing in ragged gasps. I could still hear that moaning cry, following me, sometimes to my left, sometimes to my right, like whatever it was tracking me through the woods. I don't know how long it took me to get back to camp. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes or so. The whole time I was expecting something to burst out of the trees, but nothing did. The crying stopped eventually, but the silence that followed was almost worse. By the time I saw our tent through the trees, I was drenched in sweat, shivering from cold and fear, and my ankle was swollen and aching. I stumbled into the clearing, my breathing so heavy I could barely speak. My friend was up by then, boiling water for coffee over the campfire. He took one look at me, and his face went pale. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. I collapsed onto a log near the fire, my hands shaking as I tried to explain. I told him about the silence, the shaking brush, the cry, everything. I was stumbling over my words, my voice cracking, and I could see the doubt in his eyes at first. But then I described the sound, how it wasn't like any bear or coyote we'd ever heard, and how it kept pace with me. I told him I was sure it wasn't a bear, not with the way it moved and sounded. I've spent years in the field, and I know what bears act like. This was something else. He didn't say much, just listened, and when I was done, he helped me wrap my ankle. We packed up camp in record time, neither of us saying a word. The whole drive back, I couldn't stop looking out the window, half expecting to see something in the trees. I haven't been back to that canyon since, and I don't think I ever will. I left that area to whatever was there, and even now, months later, I still get chills thinking about it. I can't explain what it was, and I don't want to. Some things are better left alone. Story 7. We'd been together for a little over a year at that point, and we both loved getting out into the woods whenever we could. It was our thing, just packing a backpack with some snacks and water, lacing up our boots, and disappearing into the trails for a few hours. That day, we picked a spot we hadn't been to before, a state park, about an hour's drive from where we lived. It wasn't super remote, but it was quiet enough that you could go for hours without seeing another person, which is exactly what we wanted. We left the house around 10 in the morning, and the drive was uneventful, just us chatting about work and stupid stuff, the radio playing softly in the background. When we got to the park, the parking lot was almost empty, just one other car with a couple of older guys gearing up for a fishing trip. We waved, they nodded, and that was it. The sky was overcast, a solid grey blanket that made everything feel a little muted, like the world was holding its breath. We started on the main trail, which wound through a dense patch of pine and oak trees. The ground was covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves, so every step made this crunching sound that seemed way too loud in the silence. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how the only noises were our footsteps and the occasional rustle of a squirrel or bird in the underbrush. We'd been walking for maybe an hour, just following the trail and talking about maybe planning a trip somewhere warm for the winter, when I first started to feel a little off. It wasn't anything big, just this nagging sense that we were being watched. You know that feeling you get sometimes, where the hairs on the back of your neck stand up for no reason. That's how it started. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was just being paranoid because we were alone out there. My girlfriend didn't say anything, but I noticed she was sticking a little closer to me than usual, her hand occasionally brushing against mine. The trail started to climb uphill, and we took a break on a large flat rock to catch our breath. We shared a bottle of water and some granola bars, and that's when I heard it for the first time, a low, distant sound that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't a bird or a squirrel. It was deeper, almost like a rumble, but it was so far away that I thought it might just be the wind, or maybe a truck on a distant road. My girlfriend heard it too, because she paused mid-bite and looked at me, her eyebrows furrowed. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Probably just the wind," I said, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The sound had this weird quality to it, like it was vibrating through the ground somehow. We finished our snacks and kept going, but the mood had shifted. We weren't talking as much, and every little noise made us jump. The woods felt thicker, darker, like the trees were closing in around us. The sunlight was fading fast because of the clouds, and it felt later than it actually was. I checked my phone. It was only around 2 in the afternoon, but it looked like dusk. We decided to turn back after another half hour or so because the trail was getting rougher, and that feeling of being watched was getting stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something, but there was never anything there, just shadows and trees. My girlfriend was holding my hand now, her grip tight, and I could feel her palm was sweaty. We were both trying to act normal, making jokes about how spooky the woods were, but it was forced, and we both knew it. Then, as we were heading back down the trail, we heard it again. This time, it was closer, much closer. It was a howl, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was deep and guttural, with this roaring undertone that made my stomach drop. It sounded huge, like whatever was making it was massive. It echoed through the trees, and for a second, everything went silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just that sound hanging in the air. My girlfriend froze, her eyes wide with fear, and I felt my heart start to hammer against my ribs. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't have an answer. I've spent a lot of time outdoors, and I know what coyotes sound like, what bears sound like. This was nothing like that. It was primal, like something out of a nightmare. We stood there for what felt like forever, just listening, but it didn't come again. The woods stayed quiet, too quiet. It was like every living thing had bolted or was hiding. We started walking again, faster this time, almost jogging. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me, my muscles tense, ready to run. The trail curved around a bend, and that's when we saw it, or rather, saw where it had been. There was a patch of bushes off to the side that looked like they'd been smashed flat, as if something big had been lying there. And nearby there were footprints, not like boot prints or animal tracks I recognized. These were huge, at least twice the size of my own foot, and they looked humanoid, but not quite. The toes were splayed out, and the impression was deep, like whatever made them was heavy. I felt a cold dread wash over me. My girlfriend saw them too, and she let out this little gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she said, her voice trembling. "What is that?" I didn't want to scare her more, so I just said, "I don't know, maybe a bear or something." but I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't make footprints like that, and they don't howl like what we heard. We both knew it, but neither of us said it out loud. We just stared at those prints for a minute, and I could feel this overwhelming urge to get out of there, to run as fast as we could. But we were still a good ways from the car, and the trail was rough. We started moving again, this time at a near run, our breaths coming in ragged pants. The whole time I kept expecting to hear that sound again, or to see something moving in the trees. Every shadow looked like it was alive. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. My girlfriend was crying softly now, and I was trying to keep it together for her. But inside, I was terrified. My mind was racing, thinking about all those stories I'd heard about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, things I'd always dismissed as bullshit. But now, out here, with that howl still ringing in my ears and those footprints in the mud, it didn't seem so far-fetched. We reached a small creek that crossed the trail, and we had to slow down to cross it on some slippery rocks. That's when it happened again, the howl. But this time, it was right on top of us. It was so loud that it felt like it was inside my head, vibrating through my bones. It wasn't just a howl, it was a roar, full of rage or warning. I don't know, but it was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It came from maybe 50 yards away, off to our left, in a thicket of pines. We both froze, and I swear my heart stopped for a second. I could see the fear in my girlfriend's eyes, pure panic, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her behind me. We didn't wait to see what it was. We just ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. We splashed through the creek, not caring about getting wet, and bolted down the trail. Branches whipped at our faces, and I could feel my lungs burning, but I didn't dare look back. My girlfriend was sobbing now, her breath hitching, and I was just focused on getting us to the car. The trail seemed to go on forever, every turn feeling like it was leading us deeper instead of out. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind us, something crashing through the woods, but there was nothing. Just our own frantic breathing and the sound of our feet pounding on the dirt. After what felt like an eternity, we burst out into the clearing near the parking lot. The other car was gone, and ours was the only one left. The sky was darker now, and a light rain had started to fall, but I didn't care. We fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door unlocked. We jumped in, locked the doors, and I started the engine, peeling out of there like our lives depended on it. I didn't even bother to put on my seatbelt until we were on the main road. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, both of us just trying to catch our breath. My girlfriend was curled up in the passenger seat, her face pale, and I could see she was still trembling. I reached over and held her hand, and she squeezed it so tight it hurt. "What was that?" she asked again, her voice small and broken. I shook my head. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. I had no explanation. None of it made sense. That howl, those footprints, it was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real. We lived it. We got home and just collapsed on the couch, not saying much. We didn't even unpack our gear until the next day. We spent the rest of the evening jumping at every little noise, and neither of us slept well that night. We've never gone back to that park, and we're a lot more cautious about where we hike now. Sometimes, late at night, I'll think about it, and that fear comes rushing back. I've tried to research it, looked up animal sounds and footprints, but nothing matches. It's just this thing that happened, this gap in my understanding of the world, and I can't explain it. I don't know what we heard or saw, but I know it was real and I know it was terrifying, and that's it. That's the story. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 8. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside my close friends, but I've been sitting on it for a while now, and I guess typing it out might help. Or maybe it'll just freak me out all over again. Either way, here goes. This happened about 2 years ago, on a Friday night in late October. I remember because it was that time of year when the air starts getting crisp and the leaves are all crunchy underfoot. But it's not freezing yet. My buddies and I, there were 3 of us in total, decided to go spotlighting for deer on my granddad's property. He's got this huge piece of land out in the sticks, mostly woods and old fields, with a dirt road that cuts through the middle. We'd done this before, lots of times, usually just for fun, not even to hunt most nights. Just drive around, shine the light, see what's out there. It was something to do, you know, a way to kill time and feel a little adventurous. That night we piled into my granddad's old pickup truck. It's a beat-up Ford from the 90s, I think, with a rusty bed and a cab that smells like oil and old leather. The engine's loud and it rattles when you go over bumps, but it's reliable. We were in the back, sitting on the bedliner, because that's where we always sat when we went spotlighting. One of my buddies was manning the spotlight. It's this big handheld thing with a cord that plugs into the truck's battery. We had it rigged up so we could swing it around easily. We started out around 7 o'clock, just as it was getting properly dark. The sky was clear with a bunch of stars out, but no moon, so it was pitch black once we got away from the house. The dirt road is narrow, with trees crowding in on both sides. And we were driving slow, maybe 10 miles an hour, just creeping along. The spotlight beam was cutting through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across the trees and the underbrush. Every now and then we'd catch a pair of eyes glowing back, usually a deer or a raccoon, and we'd all get a little jolt of excitement. It was peaceful in a way. The only sounds were the truck's engine grumbling, the tires crunching on gravel, and the wind rustling the leaves. I was sitting on the left side of the truck bed, leaning against the cab, feeling the cold metal through my jacket. My hands were getting numb, so I kept them stuffed in my pockets. One of my friends was on the right, and the other was in the middle, handling the light. We were talking quietly, joking around about stuff from school, not really paying full attention. It was just a normal night, or so I thought. Then something changed. I can't pinpoint exactly when, but the atmosphere felt heavier, like the air got thicker. The woods seemed quieter too. No more rustling, no distant owls hooting. It was like everything had gone still. I remember feeling a little uneasy, but I brushed it off. Probably just my imagination, right? We kept going, the spotlight sweeping in a slow arc. And that's when it happened. The beam swung to the left, into a gap between 2 big oak trees, and it caught something. At first I thought it was a tree stump, or maybe a weird shadow, but then my brain caught up. It was a figure, standing there completely motionless, about 25 feet away from the road. It was huge, like 8 or 9 feet tall, easy, covered in dark, matted hair that looked tangled and thick, almost like it was caked with mud. Its shoulders were massive, broader than any man's I've ever seen, and it had this rounded head with no visible neck. But the worst part was the eyes. They were yellow, not bright, like an animal's eyes sometimes are in the light, but dull, almost sickly, and they reflected back at us in a way that made my stomach drop. For a second, none of us moved. We all saw it at the same time, and I swear, time just stopped. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, a loud thumping that drowned out everything else. Then, someone, I think it was me, yelled, "What the hell is that?" And the guy with the spotlight jerked it away in shock. The beam swung wildly, and by the time we got it back on that spot, maybe 2 seconds later, it was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. But the smell hit us then. Oh God, the smell. It was this overpowering stench of rot, like a dead animal that's been lying in the sun for days, mixed with something else, a wet, musky odor, like a hog wallow. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach churn. I felt like I was going to puke right there. My friends were coughing and gagging too. One of them actually leaned over the side of the truck and dry heaved. We all started shouting at once, panicked. "Did you see that? What was it? Where'd it go?" The guy driving, my other buddy who was in the cab, slowed the truck to a stop because he heard us yelling. He leaned out the window and asked what was wrong, but we were too freaked out to make much sense. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold onto the side of the truck. We decided to jump down and check it out. Stupid, I know, but adrenaline makes you do dumb things. We hopped out of the bed, our boots hitting the dirt with a thud. The spotlight was still on, and we swept it around the area where we'd seen the thing. The beam cut through the darkness, highlighting trees, bushes, fallen logs. But there was nothing there. No movement, no sound, nothing. But the smell was still there, clinging to the air like a fog. It was so thick I could almost taste it, sour and foul, like decay. We walked a few steps into the trees, but it was dense, with thick undergrowth that snagged on our pants. The ground was soft and damp, and I could feel the cold seeping through my shoes. Every little noise made us jump, a twig snapping, leaves rustling. My heart was still racing, and I kept expecting to see those yellow eyes staring back from the shadows. But there was nothing, no tracks, no broken branches, no sign that anything had been there at all. It was like it vanished into thin air. After a few minutes of searching, we gave up. The fear was too much. It was crawling up my spine, making the hair on my arm stand up. We scrambled back into the truck, and the driver didn't need to be told twice. He hit the gas, and we sped down that dirt road faster than we ever had before. The truck bounced and jolted over ruts, and I held on tight, my knuckles white. None of us spoke on the way back. We just sat there in silence, the only sound the engine roaring and the wind whipping past. The smell lingered in the truck too, like it had soaked into our clothes and the air itself. I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see that thing following, but there was only darkness. When we got back to the house, we piled out and stood in the driveway, just staring at each other. Our faces were pale, and I could see the shock in my friend's eyes. We tried to talk about it, but words didn't come easy. What could we say? We'd all seen it, we'd all smelled it, but it made no sense. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand that tall or have eyes like that. It wasn't a person in a costume, not out there in the middle of nowhere. It was something else, something I can't explain. We never went spotlighting on that property again, not once. Every time I think about it, that image pops into my head. The huge, silent watcher in the dark, just standing there, staring right at us. It's haunted me ever since, like a ghost in my mind. I still go out to my granddad's sometimes, but I stick close to the house after dark. Those woods feel different now, like they're hiding secrets I don't want to know, and that's it. That's what happened that night. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will. All I know is that we saw something out there, something that shouldn't exist, and it changed how I see the world. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can almost smell that rotten stench again, and I get chills all over. I guess some things you just can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Story 9. It was October of 2016, and the air in the Central Cascades had that sharp, clean bite that tells you winter isn't just coming, it's already leaning on the door. My buddy and I, we've been hiking together since we were teenagers. We're both in our mid-30s, and we've seen a lot of backcountry. This wasn't some casual stroll. We were on a remote game trail, one of those thin, scratchy lines on the map that connects two alpine valleys, a route we'd planned for months. The kind of place where if you get hurt, you're on your own. You'd better hope your satellite messenger has a clear view of the sky. The day had been perfect. Hard climbing, sure, but the kind of tiredness that feels good. The kind where you earn your rest. The sun was starting to dip, painting the tops of the firs in gold, but leaving the forest floor in deep, cool shadow. We were making for a specific choke point, a narrow gap between two sheer rock faces that the map showed as the only reasonable way through without a brutal, hours-long detour. We were talking in low voices, just the usual stuff, work, life, the sheer beauty of the place. It was quiet, the good kind of quiet. The rustle of a squirrel, the distant call of a jay. Normal. Then it wasn't. It was the silence that hit me first. It's a cliché, I know, but it's a cliché because it's true. One moment, There was the gentle background hum of the forest, and the next there was nothing. Not a single bird, not a single insect. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. We both stopped talking at the same time. I remember looking at my friend, and he had that same questioning look on his face. We didn't say anything. We just stood there, listening to the absolute void of noise. It was heavy. It pressed in on my eardrums. We were maybe 100 yards from the entrance to the choke point. The trail curved ahead, so we couldn't see into the gap itself yet. We started walking again, but slower now. Our boots, which had been crunching pleasantly on the gravel, suddenly felt too loud. We were trying to be quiet without even discussing it. It was a primal thing. We rounded the bend, and that's when we saw it. The choke point was maybe 15 feet across, a slit in the mountain wall, and it was blocked. Solid. 60 yards ahead, standing square in the middle of the only path through, was something. A figure. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. It was just standing there on two legs, its shoulders hunched forward like a linebacker ready for a hit. It was dark, a deep brownish black that seemed to suck the remaining light out of the air around it. It wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears and grizzlies on their hind legs. This was different. The proportions were wrong. The legs were too long, the shoulders were impossibly broad, and it held itself with a posture that was deliberate. It wasn't just standing, it was planted. It owned that space. We froze. We just stopped dead. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It felt like it was trying to escape my ribcage. My mouth went completely dry. I could feel the cold sweat instantly prickle on my back and under my arms. I glanced at my friend. His face was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on the thing down the trail. He had his trekking poles gripped so tight his knuckles were white. I realized I was doing the same. For a few seconds, nothing happened. It just stood there, and we just stood there, locked in this impossible stare down. Then it moved. It didn't look at us. It turned its head slightly, and then it lifted one of its arms. It was thick, like a tree limb, and it slammed the palm of its hand, or what I assume was its palm, against the rock wall to its left. The sound wasn't just loud, it was a crack, a sharp, percussive noise that echoed back and forth between the cliff faces. It was the sound of immense power. I saw little puffs of dust and tiny fragments of lichen shake loose from the rock where it had hit. The echo hung in the silent air for what felt like a full minute. Then it did it again on the other side. Crack. Another echo. It was marking its territory. It was showing us, without any doubt, that it was strong enough to damage solid stone. After the second slap, it dropped its arms and let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a deep, guttural whoop. It came from low in its chest, and I didn't just hear it, I felt it. The vibration traveled through the ground and up through the soles of my boots into my bones. It resonated in my own chest, a deep bass note that made my teeth feel funny. It was a sound of pure, raw dominance. My friend and I still hadn't moved a muscle. We weren't even breathing, I don't think. Adrenaline was flooding my system so hard, I started to get a tremor in my hands. I was acutely, painfully aware of how utterly vulnerable we were. We had backpacks full of camping gear, some food, a first aid kit, and 2 aluminum trekking poles. That was it. No gun, no bear spray even, because we'd never felt the need this deep in. It was the most defenseless I have ever felt in my life. We were just 2 soft, fragile bags of meat staring down something that could probably tear us in half without breaking a sweat. The standoff felt like it lasted an hour, but it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. It would stand there, perfectly still, then slap the rock again. Crack. Then another deep whoop that vibrated in my sternum. Each time the silence afterward felt thicker, more suffocating. It was playing with us. It was demonstrating its power and waiting for our response. We had none. We were statues. Then the tempo changed. It let out a higher-pitched whoop, sharper, more urgent, and then it started beating its chest, not like in the movies, Not a slow, dramatic thump. This was fast, a rapid, pounding drumbeat. Boom, 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 boom. The sound was hollow and deep, like it was hitting a massive barrel. I could see the muscles in its torso and shoulders flexing with each impact. Simultaneously, it started stamping one of its feet on the ground. It wasn't a shuffle, it was a hard, deliberate stomp. I felt the vibration through my boots immediately. Small pebbles on the trail actually jumped and skittered. The ground was shaking. The chest beats, the stomping, the higher pitch calls. It was an escalation. The intimidation was ramping up. It was screaming at us without making a human sound, telling us to get the hell out of its way, that this was its path, its home, and we were nothing. I think I was on the verge of vomiting. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in my gut. My legs felt like water. I remember a stupid, fleeting thought. This is how I die. On a Tuesday in October, in the most beautiful place I've ever been, torn apart by a creature nobody believes in. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The chest beating ceased. The stomping ended. It dropped its arms to its sides. It stood there for one last, long moment, and then it simply turned. It didn't walk away. It loped. It moved into the trees to the east of the trail with a gait that was shockingly smooth and fast for something so huge. It was a rolling, powerful motion, and it disappeared into the thick undergrowth without making a sound. 1 second it was there, a solid, terrifying mass blocking our path, and the next, the forest had swallowed it whole. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It wasn't heavy, it was fragile. We stood there for another 5 minutes, maybe more, just staring at the empty space where it had been. Neither of us spoke. We were both shaking. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. Slowly, carefully, like we were walking on a sheet of glass, we started to move forward. Every sense was on high alert. Every shadow was a threat. The 60 yards to the choke point felt like a mile. When we got to the spot where it had stood, we stopped again. The air still smelled faintly of dust from the rock walls. And there, on the ground, in the soft, damp soil of the trail, were its footprints. They weren't just impressions, they were scuffed, like it had dug in with its weight during the stomping. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and I could have fit both of my feet inside one of those prints with room to spare. They were deep, too, showing the immense weight of the creature. The soil was pushed out at the edges. We just stared at them. We didn't take pictures. The thought never even occurred to us. It felt disrespectful or dangerous, like we were being watched. We had to get through the choke point. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, our heads on a swivel, expecting it to come back at any second. The other side of the gap didn't feel like safety, though. It just felt like a different part of its territory. We found a place to camp, maybe half a mile further on, a small, relatively flat spot not far from a creek. We set up the tent in a frantic, rushed silence. We didn't cook dinner. We just crawled into the tent, zipped it up, and sat there in the dark, listening. Every single sound from the forest outside was amplified 1,000 times. A twig snapping was a gunshot. The rustle of leaves was something moving just beyond the thin nylon wall. I didn't sleep. I don't think my friend did either. We just lay there in our sleeping bags, fully clothed, our trekking poles held tight like spears. The image of that thing, the sound of its hand hitting the rock, the feel of its call in my chest, it was all on a loop in my head. I must have drifted off at some point because I had a dream. It wasn't a normal dream. It was just the creature standing there, and in the dream, it wasn't blocking the path for itself. It was blocking the path for me. It was a personal warning. I woke up with a gasp, my heart hammering again. The inside of the tent was freezing from our breath, and the first gray light of dawn was filtering through the fabric. We packed up in minutes and got the hell out of there. We didn't talk about it on the hike back to the car. We just walked fast, constantly looking over our shoulders. It wasn't until we were in the truck, with the doors locked and the heater blasting, that my friend finally spoke. He just looked at me and said, "That was a Sasquatch." And I knew he was right. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't anything else. The way it moved, the way it sounded, the way it thought. It was intelligent. It wasn't just a wild animal defending its territory. It was asserting dominance. It was showing us two experienced guys who thought they knew these woods, that we didn't know anything at all. We were just visitors, and we were only allowed to pass because it decided to let us. I've been back in the woods since then. I love it too much to stay away. But it's different now. I'm always listening for that silence. I'm always watching the shadows between the trees. And sometimes, on a cold, quiet night, I can still feel that deep whoop resonating in my chest. A permanent echo from a day the world got a lot bigger and a lot more terrifying. I'll never forget the way it just turned and left. It didn't run. It just left. Like its work was done. And I still don't know what we did to make it so angry, or what would have happened if we'd taken one more step forward. I guess some things you're just not meant to know. It's story 10. I remember it was a Friday, because we'd all gotten off work and school early, and we were looking forward to unwinding. The drive out there was normal, just us joking around in the van. It was an old Dodge Ram van, beige with wood paneling on the sides, the kind that rattled when you went over bumps. My stepdad was driving, and he had this habit of humming along to the radio, which was playing some country station. I was in the back with my brother and cousin, and we were just messing around talking about nothing important. When we got to the lake, the sun was starting to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the water. It was still light out, but you could feel the evening creeping in. We parked the van right by the edge of the lake, where the gravel met the mud, and set up our fishing gear. My stepdad had brought a cooler with sandwiches and sodas, and we spread out a blanket on the ground. The air was warm, but not sticky, and there was this weird calmness that settled over everything. Usually, when we went fishing, you'd hear birds chirping or frogs croaking, but that night, it was dead silent, like unnaturally quiet. I remember feeling a little on edge, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just because we were out later than usual. We started fishing, casting our lines into the dark water, but nothing was biting, not even a nibble. My brother, who was always the impatient one, kept reeling in his line and checking the bait, getting frustrated. My mom tried to lighten the mood, saying maybe the fish were sleeping, but her voice sounded tight, like she was forcing it. I could see her glancing around, her eyes darting toward the trees behind us. The lake was surrounded by woods, and on one side there was this steep ridge that went up pretty high, covered in thick brush and tall pines. It was already getting dark, so the ridge looked like a black wall against the fading sky. After about an hour of nothing, we started hearing rustling sounds coming from that ridge. At first, we thought it was just rabbits or squirrels, you know, the usual nighttime critters. But the rustling didn't sound right. It was too heavy, too deliberate, like something big was moving around up there. My stepdad shushed us and listened, his head tilted. He was a big guy, not easily scared, but I saw his shoulders tense up. He told us to keep quiet, and maybe it'd go away, but it didn't. The rustling got louder, and then we started hearing these muffled voices, not like people talking clearly, but more like distant murmurs, like someone was having a conversation, but we could only catch bits and pieces. It was eerie because we knew we were the only ones out there. This place was way off the beaten path, and we hadn't seen any other cars or people. My cousin, who was about my age, whispered, "You hear that?" And I nodded, my heart starting to beat faster. It sounded like 2 or 3 people, but their voices were garbled, like they were underwater or something. We all froze, just staring at each other, and I remember the hair on my arms standing up. Then, out of nowhere, this weird sound cut through the silence. It was like a high-pitched chattering or screeching, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. My mom called it a varmint sound later, but at the time, it just sent chills down my spine. It moved fast, like really fast, through the woods, from one side of the ridge to the other, and it was gone in a flash. We all jumped, and my stepdad grabbed his flashlight, a big, heavy metal one he always carried. He shone it toward the ridge, but the beam didn't reach far enough. It just lit up the first few feet of trees and then faded into darkness. By this point, we were all getting spooked. The fish still weren't biting, and the air felt heavier, like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. My brother suggested we pack up and leave, and my mom agreed, her voice shaky. We started gathering our stuff, trying to be quick but not panicked. I was helping my cousin roll up the blanket when the rustling started again, this time closer, like whatever it was had come down the ridge. My stepdad swung the flashlight around, and that's when it happened. He pointed the beam up toward the ridge, and for a second, nothing. Then he must have caught something in the trees because he stopped moving, and his face went pale. I mean, literally drained of color, like he'd seen a ghost. My brother was next to him, and he let out this sharp gasp. "What is it?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. My stepdad didn't answer. He just kept the flashlight steady, and that's when I saw it too. Two glowing orange eyes, way up in the darkness, staring right at us. They weren't reflective like an animal's eyes in headlights. They were bright, almost fiery, and they didn't blink. They just held there, unmoving, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. It was like those eyes were sucking all the warmth out of the air. My brother snatched the flashlight from my stepdad and shone it again, but the eyes were gone, vanished. For a second, we all stood there, frozen, not saying a word. Then the panic hit us all at once. My mom started crying, saying, let's go now." And we scrambled to get everything into the van. I remember my hands were shaking so bad, I could barely zip up the tackle box. My cousin was hyperventilating, and my brother kept looking back toward the ridge, like he expected something to charge out of the woods. We threw everything into the back of the van, rods, cooler, blanket, all of it, and piled in. My stepdad fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling, and finally got the engine started. He reversed out of there so fast the tires spun in the gravel, kicking up dust. We were all crammed in, me in the back seat between my brother and cousin, and I could feel everyone's fear like a physical thing, thick in the air. The van's headlights cut through the darkness, and we bounced along the dirt road, heading back toward the main highway. We'd only driven maybe 100 yards when it happened. A loud bang echoed through the stillness, so sharp and sudden it made us all jump. It sounded like something heavy had slammed into the roof of the van. The whole vehicle shook, and for a second, I thought we'd hit a tree or something. My stepdad slammed on the brakes, and we skidded to a stop. "What was that?" my mom screamed, and my brother leaned over to look out the window. But my stepdad didn't wait. He just hit the gas again, and we sped off, faster this time. I remember clutching the seat in front of me, my knuckles white, and looking up at the roof, half expecting to see it dented inward. We didn't stop to check. We just kept driving, everyone too scared to say much. The ride home was tense. No one talked. We just listened to the hum of the engine and the wind rushing past. I kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see those orange eyes following us. But it was just dark forest and occasional street lights once we hit the main road. My mom was crying softly, and my stepdad had this grim look on his face, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. My brother and cousin were silent, and I could feel my own heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. The whole time, I was replaying those eyes in my mind, how they seemed to glow from within, how they felt intelligent, not like any animal I knew. When we finally pulled into our driveway, it was late, probably past midnight. The house was dark, and we all stumbled out, exhausted and shaken. My stepdad went to unlock the front door, and that's when he saw it. On the roof of the van, right in the middle, was this huge rock. It was awkwardly shaped, kind of jagged and bigger than my head. I remember staring at it, my mouth hanging open, because there was no way a person could have thrown something that heavy onto the roof, especially not while we were moving. It must have weighed at least 20 or 30 pounds, and it was perched there like it had been placed carefully, not just dropped. We all gathered around, just staring at it. My stepdad reached up and touched it, then pulled his hand back like it was hot. "How did this get here?" he muttered, and no one had an answer. We hadn't stopped anywhere after we left the lake, and we hadn't seen anyone on the road. The rock was covered in dirt and moss, like it had been picked up from the woods. That's when it hit me. The bang we heard, the thing landing on the roof. It was this rock. Whatever had been on that ridge had thrown it at us, or dropped it or something. The thought made my stomach churn. We left the rock on the roof that night. No one wanted to touch it. The next day, my stepdad got a ladder and took it down, and we all examined it. It was definitely from the area around the lake, the same type of stone you'd find there. We never reported it to the police or anything. What would we say? That something in the woods threw a rock at our van? They'd think we were nuts, so we just kept it to ourselves, and over the years we've talked about it occasionally, but it always ends with us shaking our heads. I've thought about that night a lot since then. The muffled voices, the fast-moving varmint sound, those glowing orange eyes, and the rock. I've read stories online about Bigfoot encounters, and a lot of them mention similar things. Rocks being thrown, strange noises, eyes that glow. Part of me wants to believe it was just a bear or something, but bears don't have eyes like that, and they don't throw rocks. Whatever it was, it felt ancient and powerful, and it knew we were there. I still get chills thinking about it, especially when I'm out in the woods or it's dark outside. Sometimes I'll hear a rustle in the bushes, and my heart will skip a beat, and I'll remember those eyes staring back at me, like they're burned into my memory. That's it, really. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will. It's just one of those things that happened, and I'm left wondering what it was out there in the dark, watching us. Marshall, Story 11. I started my shift around 10 in the evening, and everything was normal at first. Did my rounds, checked in with dispatch, the usual. But as it got closer to midnight, the air started to feel heavier, like a storm was brewing, even though the sky was clear. I remember driving along that back road, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and the woods on either side just looked dense, impenetrable. I've patrolled there before, but it never felt this eerie. Maybe it was the leftover Halloween decorations I'd seen earlier, fake cobwebs and skeletons in yards, that put me on edge. But this was different. It was a deep gut feeling that something wasn't right. I had the radio on low, mostly static with occasional updates, and I was just cruising along, trying to stay alert. The road is narrow, with ditches on both sides, and it curves a lot, so you have to take it slow. My mind was wandering a bit, thinking about my kids, what I'd do on my day off, stupid stuff. When I rounded this one bend, that's when I saw it. Movement in the ditch to my right, just at the edge of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a dog, but then it stepped out onto the road and my brain just froze. This thing was tall, like really tall, way taller than any person I've ever seen. I'd say it was over 7 feet, easy, and its shoulders were broad, massive, like a linebacker's but bigger. It was covered in this brownish hair, not fur like an animal, but more like thick matted hair that looked almost wet or muddy. It moved in 3 long, heavy strides across the road, and each step made this thudding sound that I could feel in my chest, even through the car. The way it walked wasn't human. It was too fluid, too powerful, like it weighed a ton, but moved effortlessly. As it crossed, it turned its head slightly toward me, and that's when I saw its face. Oh God, that face. It wasn't human, and it wasn't a bear either. I've seen bears up close before, and this was nothing like that. Its eyes were dark, deep-set, and they seemed to gleam in the headlights, but not in a reflective way like an animal's. More like they were just absorbing the light. The nose was flat, almost pushed in, and the mouth, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't snarling or anything, just set in this neutral line, but it looked wrong, like it didn't belong on any living thing I've ever seen. The whole face was angular, with a heavy brow, and the skin underneath the hair was dark, almost leathery. My stomach tightened instantly, like someone had punched me in the gut. I felt this wave of terror wash over me, cold and sharp. My hands clenched on the steering wheel, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, so loud I was sure it was echoing in the car. I didn't scream or anything. I just stared, frozen, as it vanished into the trees on the other side of the road. It happened so fast, maybe 3 seconds total, but it felt like an eternity. The moment it disappeared, the woods went dead silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just this oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking so bad I could barely put the car in park. I sat there for what felt like ages, just breathing, trying to get my heart rate down. The dashboard clock read just past midnight, but I didn't need to check. I knew the time because it was burned into my brain. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it moved, that face, the sheer size of it. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person in a costume. But no, costumes don't move like that. And this was after Halloween. Who'd be out here in the middle of nowhere? And the strides, they were too long, too heavy. I've seen big guys run, but this was different. It was like it owned the ground it walked on. I thought about radioing it in, my finger hovering over the button. But what would I say? Hey, dispatch, I just saw Bigfoot. They'd think I'd lost it or I was drunk and I couldn't risk that. My job's everything to me. It pays the bills, gives me purpose, so I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my notebook from the passenger seat, my hands still trembling, and I scribbled down the time and location. Just a quick note. Midnight, back road near Miller's Woods. Large creature sighted. I didn't write what it was, because even I didn't want to admit it to myself, but deep down, I knew. I'd heard stories, read stuff online, but I always dismissed it as nonsense. Now, though, it was real. After a few minutes, I started the car again and drove slowly past where it had crossed. The ditch where it came from was muddy, and I could see these huge footprints, deep impressions in the soft ground, bigger than any boot print I've ever seen. They were wide, with what looked like toes, and they led right into the woods. I didn't get out to investigate. I was too scared. The silence was still there, pressing in on me, and I had this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, like whatever it was. It was still close by, just hidden in the trees. I drove back to the station after that, my mind buzzing. The rest of my shift was a blur. I went through the motions, but I was on edge the whole time. Every shadow, every noise made me jump. When I got home, the sun was coming up, and I tried to act normal around my family, but I couldn't shake the image of that thing. I kept seeing it in my mind, over and over, the way it turned its head like it was acknowledging me, but not in a threatening way, more like it was just curious. Or maybe I'm reading into it now. At the time, it was pure fear. I've patrolled that area since then, and every time my skin crawls, I find myself driving slower, scanning the trees, half expecting to see it again, but I never have. Part of me wants to, just to confirm I wasn't going crazy, but another part hopes I never do, because if it's real, what else is out there? That sighting, as brief as it was, changed something in me. I used to think the world was pretty straightforward, but now I know there are things we can't explain, and that silence after it vanished, that's what gets me. It was like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I still don't know what, and I probably never will. Story 12. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for a while now. My partner and I are just normal people in our mid-30s, living in Maine, not in a big city, more like a quiet town. And we love hiking. We're not experts or anything, but we've done plenty of trails over the years. This happened back in August 2020, up in the mountains north of Rangeley, near the Bigelow Preserve. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, something to clear our heads and enjoy the late summer weather. But what started as a peaceful trip turned into the most terrifying day of my life. And I still can't shake the feeling that something out there was watching us, maybe even playing with us. That morning, we got an early start. The air was cool and crisp, with that fresh pine smell you only get deep in the woods. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting these long, dappled shadows on the trail. We'd packed light, some water, snacks, a couple of sandwiches for lunch, and we were just chatting about nothing in particular, the kind of easy conversation you have when you're comfortable with someone. The trail was pretty quiet. We hadn't seen anyone else all morning, which wasn't unusual for that area. It felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves, and at first, that was a good thing. We'd been hiking for a few hours when we decided to stop for lunch. Found a nice spot off the trail, a little clearing with a fallen log we could sit on. The sounds around us were normal, birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant trickle of a stream. We were unwrapping our sandwiches when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe some animal noise, but it was different. It was this low, rhythmic muttering, almost like someone talking under their breath, but not quite human. It was faint, coming from somewhere deep in the trees to our left. I paused mid-bite and looked at my partner. Their eyes met mine, and I could tell they heard it too. "You hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. They nodded slowly, not saying anything, just listening. The muttering continued, soft but steady, like a chant or something. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a moose, nothing. It was too structured, too rhythmic. We both sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My heart started beating a little faster, that first prickle of unease creeping up my spine. I remember thinking maybe it was another hiker, but the sound was too odd, and we were miles from any real trailhead. Why would someone be out here muttering like that? We tried to brush it off at first. "Probably just the wind," my partner said, but their voice was shaky. We finished our lunch quickly, packing up our stuff without saying much. The muttering didn't stop. If anything, it seemed to get a bit louder, like whatever was making it was moving closer. We decided to get back on the trail and keep going, thinking maybe we'd leave it behind. But as we started walking, the sounds followed us. Not just the muttering now, there were other noises too. Overlapping voices, like multiple people talking at once, but garbled and low. Then came the wood knocks, sharp, deliberate cracks, like someone hitting a tree with a thick branch, and heavy footsteps, crunching through the underbrush, pacing us from the sides of the trail. That's when the real fear set in. We were walking faster now, not running yet, but our pace had picked up. I kept glancing into the trees, but I couldn't see anything. The forest was thick, dense with firs and pines, and the shadows made it hard to distinguish shapes. But I felt eyes on us, this intense, crawling sensation, like we were being watched from every direction. My skin was tingling, and I had this cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. My partner was gripping my arm, their knuckles white. We didn't talk much, just exchanged worried looks. Every time we heard a footstep or a knock, we'd flinch and look around, but there was nothing there. The sounds kept escalating. The muttering became more frantic, less rhythmic, like whoever or whatever was getting agitated. It was circling us now, moving from one side of the trail to the other. I could hear it on the left, then moments later on the right, like it was herding us. The footsteps were heavy, thudding sounds that made the ground vibrate slightly under my feet. I remember thinking how big whatever it was must be to make noises like that. My mind raced through possibilities. Bear, moose, but none of them fit. Bears don't make speech-like sounds, and moose don't knock on trees like that. This felt intelligent, purposeful. Then came the moment that still haunts me. We were on a narrow part of the trail, with thick bushes on either side, when the muttering suddenly got really close, maybe only 20 or 30 feet away. It was loud now, a chaotic babble of low voices, and it was coming from both sides at once. We were surrounded, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, so hard it felt like it might burst out. My breathing was shallow, and I was trembling all over. My partner was whispering, "What do we do? What is that?" But I had no answers. That's when we heard the deep huff, a loud guttural sound like a massive animal exhaling forcefully. It was followed by a loud thwack, the sound of something heavy hitting a tree trunk. The impact was so strong I felt it through the ground. That was it. We broke. We didn't say a word, just looked at each other and knew we had to run. We bolted off the trail, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about direction, just needing to get away. Branches scraped my arms and face, and I stumbled over roots, but I didn't stop. I could hear my partner panting beside me, and behind us the sounds continued. The frantic muttering, the footsteps, now faster, like whatever it was chasing us. We ran for what felt like forever, but it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. We were cutting cross-country, trying to head back toward where we thought the car was. But everything looked the same. I was terrified we'd get lost, but the alternative, staying there, was worse. As we pushed through a thicket, I heard one final rapid vocalization, a series of sharp, guttural calls that seemed to echo through the trees. It was close, too close, and it sent a fresh wave of panic through me. We kept running, and finally we burst out onto a dirt road. I almost cried with relief when I saw our car parked a little ways down. We scrambled inside, locking the doors immediately. I was shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. My partner was crying softly, and I reached over to hold their hand, my own hands trembling. We sat there for a minute, just breathing, listening for any sounds outside, but it was quiet. The forest had gone silent again, like nothing had happened. But the smell, that's something I'll never forget. This earthy, musky odor, like wet soil and something else, something wild, had followed us. It was in the car, clinging to our clothes and skin. I rolled down the window to let in some air, but the smell lingered. We drove away as fast as we could, not talking much, just trying to process what had happened. My mind was racing, going over every detail, the muttering, the wood knocks, the footsteps, the huff, the tree hit. It all pointed to something I'd only heard about in stories. When we got home, we were both visibly shaken. We called a couple of close friends and told them what happened, but I could tell they didn't fully believe us. Who would? It sounds crazy. But we started researching online, and we found all these accounts from other people who'd had similar experiences in the same area. Bigfoot reports, sightings, sounds just like what we heard. It was chilling to read, but also weirdly comforting to know we weren't alone. To this day, I can't explain what we encountered out there. Was it Bigfoot? Something else? I don't know, but it was intelligent, and it felt menacing. That earthy smell stayed with me for hours, a constant reminder of how close we came to something I still don't understand. We haven't been back to that part of the woods since, and I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll hear a noise outside, and my heart will start racing all over again. It's like that fear is etched into me now, a part of who I am. I just hope by sharing this, someone else might have some answers, because I sure don't. Story 13. It was November of 1978, and I was 13 years old. That's important, I think, because being that age, you're not a little kid anymore. But you're sure not an adult. You're stuck in this weird middle ground where you think you know things, but you really don't know anything at all. I found out just how little I knew on that day. The place was just outside Cedar Springs, Michigan. My family lived in a house that backed onto a bunch of fields and woods right near Mears Lake Road. It wasn't the middle of nowhere, but it was quiet, the kind of quiet that gets into your bones after a while. That afternoon, I was out in a cut cornfield. The corn had been harvested weeks before, so it was just these frozen, ragged stalks sticking up out of the snow. The whole world was shades of white and brown and grey. The sky was this flat, dull colour, like a sheet of dirty ice. It was cold, the kind of cold that makes your nose hairs stick together when you breathe in. Daylight was starting to go, that long, slow fade that happens in late fall. It wasn't dark yet, but it was getting there. The kind of light that makes everything look soft and blurry around the edges. I was hunting. White-tailed deer. I had my dad's old .30-30 rifle. It was too big for me, really, but I was proud to be trusted with it. I wasn't a great shot, but I was careful. I knew the rules. I was leaning against an old, rough fence post at the edge of the field, just watching the tree line. My breath was making little clouds in the air. Everything was still. So still. You could hear the crunch of snow under your own boots, like it was the loudest sound in the world. I remember shifting my weight, trying to get comfortable, the cold of the metal rifle seeping through my gloves. I was just waiting, watching for any movement in the shadows between the trees. And then it started. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a prickling on the back of my neck, right at the hairline, like when you get the chills. But it didn't go away. It just sat there, this little pinpoint of cold awareness. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the cold or a trick of my mind. But it grew. It spread down my spine, this intense crawling nervousness. My heart, which had been beating slow and steady, started to pick up its pace. Thump, 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 thump. It got louder in my ears. This wasn't the excited nervousness of maybe seeing a deer. This was different. This was a deep animal feeling. The feeling you get when you just know that you're not alone, that something is looking at you. My first thought was, it's a deer, it's behind you, just watch the woods in front of you. But the feeling was so heavy, so specific, it felt like a weight on my shoulders. I couldn't not look. It was a physical pull, so slowly, so carefully. I turned my head to the right, looking back towards the tree line where the field met the woods, and I saw it. About 50, 60 yards away, right at the edge where the shadows started to get thick, there was a figure. It was massive. I'm not talking about a big man. I'm talking about something that was just huge. It had to be 7 feet tall, easy, maybe more. It was standing upright, just perfectly still, and it was covered in hair, dark brown hair like wet bark, long and shaggy. But its face was different. The hair was shorter there, and the skin underneath was a lighter color, like a pale tan or a dull gray. It wasn't a human face. It was flat with a heavy brow, and I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, but I could feel them. My brain short-circuited. It just started throwing out explanations. Anything to make this not be what it was. It's a bear standing on its hind legs. But I'd seen bears. This wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong. Bears are top-heavy, round. This thing was built like a person, but scaled up. Powerful shoulders, a thick chest. It's a guy in a big coat, a hunter. But no coat is that shaggy, that uniform, and no hunter stands that still, that perfectly motionless, just watching a kid in a field. I must have stared for a full 10 seconds, my mind racing, my blood feeling like ice water in my veins. I finally managed to tear my eyes away, looking down at the snow at my feet. I took a deep, shaky breath. Okay, I thought. Okay, you're seeing things. It's the fading light. It's a weird stump. Just look again, and it'll be gone. So I looked back. It hadn't moved. Not an inch. It was in the exact same position, and now the fear really locked in. This was real. This was happening. My hands were trembling. I remember the rough texture of the fence post under my hand, the way the cold bit into my fingertips. I had to know. I had to be sure. I couldn't just run. What if it was just a stump? I'd feel like an idiot. Slowly, so slowly my joints felt rusty, I raised my rifle. I nestled the stock against my shoulder, the way my dad taught me. My heart was hammering against my ribs now, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. I pressed my eye to the scope. The world shrank down to that circle of glass. I panned across the tree line, the crosshairs jumping over bare branches and dark trunks, and then I found it. The scope brought it into a terrifying, crystal-clear focus. The hair wasn't just dark, it was matted in places, with bits of twig or leaf caught in it. It was thick and coarse-looking. The light-colored face was wrinkled, leathery, and the eyes. I saw the eyes now. They were deep-set under that heavy brow, and they were dark, not black, but a deep, intelligent brown. They were fixed right on me. There was no malice in them, not that I could see. There was no anger. It was just a look, a calm, observing, utterly non-human look. We were staring right at each other through that scope. It knew I was looking at it. It knew I saw it. That's when the last bit of courage I had just evaporated. It was like a switch flipped. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a man. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real, and it was looking right at me. A sound came out of my mouth, a little choked gasp. My body took over. Every muscle, every nerve was screaming one word. Run. I didn't think. I didn't plan a route. I just moved. I shoved myself away from the fence post so hard I almost fell. I fumbled with the rifle, clutching it in one hand, not even caring about safety or anything else. And then I ran. I ran across that cornfield like the devil himself was on my heels. The frozen corn stalks were like little tripwires, snapping against my legs. The snow wasn't deep, but it was slippery, and my boots slid and skidded with every step. I didn't run in a straight line. I weaved, my head down, my lungs burning with the cold air. I could hear my own ragged breaths, the pounding of my feet, the whoomp of my coat. I didn't dare look back. I was too afraid of what I might see. Too afraid that if I looked back I'd see it moving, see it coming after me. The field seemed to stretch on forever. Our house was maybe 300 yards away, but it felt like 3 miles. Every second, I expected to feel a hand, a claw on my shoulder. I expected to hear a roar or a grunt, or the sound of something huge crashing through the woods and into the field behind me. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own panic and the crunch, crunch, crunch of my desperate flight. I finally hit the backyard, my legs feeling like rubber. I stumbled up the porch steps, my fingers so numb and clumsy I could barely work the doorknob. I burst into the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind me so hard the whole frame shook. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, leaning against the door as if I could hold the whole world out. My mom was at the stove. She turned around, surprised. "Goodness, what's gotten into you? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just shook my head, gasping for air. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed up tight with fear. I slid the bolt lock on the door, my hands still shaking violently. "You're letting all the cold air in," she said, turning back to her cooking. I didn't care. I stood there for a long time just listening for any sound from outside. A footstep on the porch, a knock on the door, anything. But there was only the normal sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the sizzle from the stove. I never went back for the rest of the hunting season. I made up excuses. I said I was sick. I said I'd lost the motivation. I never told my dad what happened. I never told anyone, not for years and years. What would I have said? I saw a monster in the woods. They would have laughed at me, or worse, thought I was crazy. I put the rifle away in the closet and tried to forget. But you don't forget something like that. The memory of it, that massive, silent figure, those calm, knowing eyes staring back at me through the scope. It got stuck in my head. It haunted me. It still does. It wasn't just the terror of the moment, though that was bad enough. It was the slow, dawning realization later, the knowing that I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, that I had looked at a Bigfoot. And the most chilling part of it all, the thing that still keeps me up at night sometimes, is that it was just watching me. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't aggressive. It was just there, observing. And I have no idea why. I have no idea what it wanted or what it was thinking. I just know that for one long, frozen moment in a Michigan cornfield, our worlds collided, and mine was never the same again. I saw it. It saw me. And then I ran. And that was it. That was the whole thing, but it was enough. It was more than enough. Story 14. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it was back in May 2018. I was only 9 years old at the time, just a kid in elementary school in Illinois. And that day started out like any other. After school let out, my friend and I decided to play soccer on the field behind the school. It was one of those warm spring afternoons where the air feels thick and heavy and the sun starts dipping low early, casting long shadows that make everything look a little eerie. We were kicking the ball around, laughing and messing up passes because we were both pretty bad at it, but it didn't matter. We were just having fun, the way kids do when they're free from classrooms and homework. The woods behind the school were always there, like a dark wall at the edge of the field. I'd seen them 1,000 times, but I never really thought much about them. They were just trees, you know? Sometimes we'd dare each other to get close, but we never went in too far because it got dark real quick under the canopy, and there were stories about animals or whatever. That day, though, things felt different. Maybe it was because it was getting late. Dusk was settling in, and the sky was turning this weird orange-purple color that made the woods look even deeper and more shadowy. The air had that cool bite to it that comes right before nightfall. And I remember shivering a little, even though I wasn't cold. We were kicking the ball back and forth, and I got a little too excited. I swung my leg hard, and the ball sailed way off, right into the edge of the woods. It wasn't deep, maybe 10 or 15 feet in, but enough that we couldn't see it from where we were standing. My friend groaned and said we should just leave it, but I didn't want to lose the ball. It was mine, and my dad would have been mad if I came home without it, so I said, "Come on, let's just grab it real quick." He hesitated, but eventually we both started walking toward the trees. The second we stepped into the woods, the temperature dropped. It was like walking into a refrigerator. The light faded almost instantly and everything got quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I could hear our footsteps crunching on leaves and twigs, and the sound seemed way louder than it should have. The air smelled damp and earthy, like wet soil and rotting leaves, and I remember feeling this knot in my stomach like I shouldn't be there. But we kept going, scanning the ground for the ball. We found it pretty quick, lodged against a tree root. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I heard it, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping. It came from deeper in the woods, not too far away. I froze, my hand still on the ball, and looked up. My friend was a few feet behind me, and he heard it too because he stopped dead in his tracks. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice shaky. I didn't answer right away. I was staring into the trees, trying to see what made the noise. The woods were dense, with thick trunks and low-hanging branches, and shadows were everywhere, shifting as the last bits of light filtered through. Then I saw it. Movement, something big and dark, way taller than a person, slipping between the trees. It was maybe 30 or 40 feet away, and it moved fast but smooth, like it was gliding. I couldn't make out details because it was mostly silhouette against the darker background, but I saw it was covered in hair, long, shaggy hair that seemed to blend into the shadows. It was huge, way bigger than any man I'd ever seen, and it had this hunched shape that made my heart jump into my throat. I pointed, my arm trembling, and said, "Do you see that?" My voice came out as a croak. My friend squinted, but he shook his head. "See what?" "I don't see anything." He sounded annoyed, like I was messing around, but I wasn't. I kept watching, and for a split second it paused, and I swear it turned its head toward us. I couldn't see eyes or a face, just this dark mass that felt like it was staring right at me. A chill ran down my spine, and my whole body went cold. I felt this primal fear, the kind that makes your legs feel like jelly and your breath catch in your chest. Then it moved again, disappearing behind a thicker cluster of trees. The sound of more branches rustling followed, like it was walking away, but it was too quiet for something that big. That's when the fear really hit me. I dropped the ball. I didn't even care about it anymore and grabbed my friend's arm. "We have to go now," I yelled, and we both turned and ran. Running out of those woods was the scariest part. Every shadow felt like it was reaching for us. Every sound made me flinch. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and my lungs burned from sucking in the cold air. My friend was right behind me, panting, and I could tell he was scared too, even if he hadn't seen what I did. We burst out onto the field, and the relief was instant but short-lived. The school was still there, the lights from the parking lot glowing in the distance, but I couldn't shake the image of that thing in my head. We didn't stop running until we reached the sidewalk near the school entrance. We were both out of breath, sweating even though it was cool, and I was shaking so bad I had to sit down on the curb. My friend kept asking, "What did you see? Was it an animal?" But I couldn't form the words. All I could think about was how big it was, how it moved, and the way it seemed to watch us. I knew it wasn't an animal, not like a bear or anything I'd seen in books. This was different. A few minutes later, my dad pulled up in his car to pick me up. He saw me sitting there, pale and trembling, and he knew something was wrong right away. He got out and came over, asking what happened. I tried to explain, but the words came out in a jumble. "There was something in the woods, Dad, big and hairy, like a monster." I know it sounds crazy now, but at the time, I was dead serious. My dad is a practical guy. He works in construction, doesn't believe in ghosts or anything, but he saw how scared I was, so he listened. He asked my friend, who just shrugged and said he didn't see anything, which made me feel even more alone. My dad decided to call the police, just to be safe. He didn't want to take any chances, especially with kids playing near the woods. While we waited, he drove us home, and I sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the darkening sky. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark figure moving between the trees. I felt this heavy weight in my chest, like I'd witnessed something I wasn't supposed to. The police showed up at our house about an hour later. 2 officers, both looking tired and kind of bored. My dad explained what I'd told him, and they asked me to describe it again. I did my best. I said it was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, covered in dark hair, and it moved fast. One of the officers nodded and said, "Sounds like you saw the groundskeeper. He was out there today clearing brush." But I knew that wasn't right. I'd seen the groundskeeper before. He's a shorter guy, wears a bright orange vest and uses tools. This thing was massive and silent, and it didn't look human at all. I tried to say that, but the officer just patted my shoulder and said, "Kids imagine things sometimes. It's easy to get spooked in the woods at dusk." That dismissal hit me harder than the sight itself. I felt this frustration bubbling up like no one believed me. My dad thanked them, and after they left, he tried to reassure me. "It's okay, son. Probably was just the groundskeeper." But I could tell he was uneasy too, maybe because of how shaken I was. We didn't talk about it much after that, but I couldn't let it go. The rest of that night, I was on edge. Every noise in the house made me jump, and I kept my bedroom light on. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my head. The way the branch snapped, the glimpse of that dark shape, the chill that ran through me. It all felt so real. I started wondering if I was going crazy, but deep down, I knew what I saw. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I'd look them up on the computer when no one was around, reading accounts from other people who'd seen similar things. It was comforting in a weird way, knowing I wasn't alone. But that day, the day it happened, is what sticks with me. The fear was so raw and immediate, and the fact that it was brushed off made it even scarier. It's like this secret I carry, something I can't fully explain, and every time I think about it, I get that same cold feeling in my gut. I never went back into those woods after that, and even now, years later, I avoid places like that. Whatever it was, it changed me, and I still don't have the answers. Story 15. The first hour or so was normal. The air was cool, the kind of damp chill that hangs in the mountains even in late spring. I was pushing through thick undergrowth, ferns up to my waist in places, climbing over fallen logs slick with moss. My boots were making that soft, sucking sound in the wet leaf litter. It was peaceful. I remember thinking how the only thing I could hear was my own breathing and the occasional scurry of a squirrel. That's why the first thing that felt off was the smell. It wasn't a bad smell, not like rot or anything. It was musky, earthy, like wet fur and old leaves and something else I couldn't place. It was strong too, not just a faint whiff. It hung in the air like a fog. I stopped for a minute, sniffing, trying to figure it out. I thought maybe a bear had bedded down nearby recently. You get used to animal smells out here, but this was different. It was heavier, more pungent. I shrugged it off and kept going, my senses just a little more alert than before. That's when I started seeing the clearings. They weren't natural. They were oval-shaped, about the size of a small car, and the ground was packed down, like something big had been lying there. In a couple of them, there were crude beds made of branches. Not like a nest a deer might make, but something more deliberate. The branches were thicker, some of them as big around as my wrist, and they were bent and woven in a way that looked intentional, like a platform. They weren't neatly stacked. It was messy, haphazard, but the pattern was there. I crouched down next to one, my fingers brushing against the broken ends of the branches. They were fresh. The wood was still green and flexible, not dry and brittle. Something had done this recently. The musky smell was strongest right here, right in the center of these clearings. It made the back of my throat feel dry. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. This wasn't right. I've seen where bears sleep, where deer bed down. This was different. The scale was all wrong. It was too big, too structured, even in its crudeness. I stood up slowly, my eyes scanning the trees around me. Everything was still, too still. The birds had gone quiet. I hadn't even noticed it until that moment. The forest was holding its breath. I decided to climb the slope to my left, thinking I could get a better vantage point, see if I could spot anything from higher up. The ground was steep, covered in a tangle of rhododendron that grabbed at my pants and jacket. I was using my hands to pull myself up, my heart starting to thump a little harder from the exertion and the growing unease. I reached a small rocky outcrop and paused, catching my breath, looking down into the basin I'd just left. That's when I saw the movement, down by the creek, maybe 150 yards away, through a break in the trees. My brain tried to process it, to file it into a known category: bear, elk, a trick of the light. It failed. There were two of them, two massive, upright beings walking along the creek bank. I froze, absolutely solid. My breath caught in my chest, and for a second I thought I might pass out from not breathing. I dropped down behind the rock, peering over the top, my hands gripping the cold, damp stone so hard my knuckles turned white. The one in front was huge. I mean, impossibly huge. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in dark brown, almost black hair that was long and shaggy. It walked on 2 legs, its arms swinging at its sides with a natural, powerful rhythm. Its shoulders were massive, hunched and broad, and it was moving with a purpose, a steady, ground-eating pace that was both graceful and intimidating. The second one was shorter but still immense, 7 feet tall, easy. Its hair was a lighter brown, a rusty color, and on its back, clinging to the fur on its shoulders, was a smaller one, a baby. It was the size of a small child, and it was alive, its little arms wrapped around the bigger one's neck, its head tucked in. It was a family, a goddamn family unit. This wasn't a blur, this wasn't a shadow. The sun was filtering through the leaves, dappling light on them. I could see the way the muscles moved under the thick hair on the larger one's back and legs. I could see the texture of the fur, matted in places, cleaner in others. I could see the way the smaller one's grip tightened as it was carried. This was real. This was happening right in front of me. The terror wasn't a scream, it was a deep, cold dread that seeped into my bones. It was the absolute certainty that I was not supposed to be here. I was an intruder. I was looking at something I was never meant to see. It was a violation of a boundary I never knew existed. Then the big one, the tall, dark one, turned its head. It didn't snap its head around. It was a slow, deliberate turn, as if it had known I was there all along and was only now acknowledging me. Its head was conical, sloping back from a heavy, pronounced brow ridge. I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, just deep shadows under that brow, but I felt its gaze. It was like a physical weight. It looked right at my hiding spot. I swear to God, it looked right at me. Time stopped. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I was praying, begging whatever power existed that it wouldn't come for me. I was just a man. A stupid man with a backpack and a knife that suddenly felt like a toy. I was nothing compared to that thing. It held its gaze for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. Then it turned its head back forward. It didn't make a sound. Neither of them did. They just kept walking. That same steady, unhurried pace, their long arms swinging. They moved up the far bank and into the thick brush, the smaller one with the baby on its back, following without a glance back. The foliage swallowed them. One moment they were there, solid and real, and the next, there was just empty space and the gentle gurgle of the creek. I didn't move. I crouched there, my body pressed against the cold rock, my knees screaming in protest. I was barely breathing, taking in tiny, silent sips of air. The smell hit me again, that same musky, earthy odor, but now it was stronger than ever, so thick I could almost taste it. It was their smell, it was the smell of them, and it was all around me, sealing the reality of what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't a hallucination. The smell was proof. It was tangible. It was on my clothes, in my nose, in my lungs. I stayed like that for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough for the sun to move and the shadows to shift. My legs were numb, my body shaking with adrenaline and cold. I finally risked moving my head, scanning the creek bank, the slope, the trees, nothing. Just the normal, quiet woods. But it wasn't normal anymore. It would never be normal again. Getting out of there was the most careful, terrified journey of my life. Every rustle of a leaf made me jump. Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of pure fear through me. I didn't run. Running felt like a bad idea. It felt like it would attract attention. So I moved slowly, deliberately, placing each foot with painstaking care, my eyes constantly scanning, my ears straining. I was backtracking, following my own faint trail through the crushed ferns, and all I could think was that the smell was still there, following me, or maybe I was just carrying it with me now. When I finally broke through to the main trail, the relief was so physical I almost collapsed. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the cap off my water bottle. I drank greedily, the water doing nothing to wash the taste of fear and that damn musk out of my mouth. I sat on a log for a while, just trying to get my heart rate under control, trying to make my hands stop shaking. I looked back the way I'd come. The forest was just a wall of green. It looked peaceful, innocent, but I knew what was in there. I hiked back to my truck in a daze. The whole drive home, my mind was replaying it on a loop, the size of them, the way they moved, the heavy brow of the big one as it turned its head, the little one clinging to its parent's back, the crude beds of branches. It all fit together in a way that was horrifyingly coherent. I hadn't just seen a monster. I'd seen a glimpse of a life, a family, something that lived in those deep, secret places and wanted nothing to do with us. A few days later, I made an anonymous report to a park ranger station. I didn't give my name. I just told them what I saw and where. I don't know if they believed me. I don't know if they did anything. It didn't matter. I wasn't reporting it for them. I was reporting it, so it was written down somewhere, so it existed outside of my own head. That was years ago now. I still hike, but I don't go off trail anymore. Not like that. Not into the deep, quiet basins. Every time I smell damp earth and decaying leaves, my heart gives a little lurch. That image is burned into my brain, clearer than any photograph. The two massive, dark figures moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with me. The smaller form hitching a ride. I intruded on their space that day, and I saw something I can never unsee. It reminded me, in the most terrifying way possible, that those old woods hold mysteries we can't even begin to understand, and that some things are better left alone. I still don't know what they were. I just know what I saw. Story 16. All right, I've been reading this forum for a while, but I never thought I'd be writing my own post. I always figured people were either making stuff up or mistaking a bear for something else. I don't think that anymore. What happened to my family and me in August of 2016 changed all that. I need to get this out because even now, years later, I still get a tightness in my chest thinking about it. It was a Friday evening. We'd driven out to this camping spot near Silverton, Oregon, in the Cascade foothills. It was a place we'd been to a couple of times before. It felt safe, you know? A nice clearing big enough for our trailer, with a steep, tree-covered ridge rising up on one side. It was peaceful, the kind of place where you just breathe easier. We got there with a few hours of daylight left. I remember the air was warm, but not too hot. It had that clean, piney smell. My wife and I got the trailer set up while the kids ran around, chasing each other and throwing sticks. They were little then, full of that endless energy you only have when you're a kid and you're out in the woods. We got a fire going, cooked up some hot dogs and beans, the usual camping dinner. Everything was normal, perfect even. After we ate, the sun started to go down. The sky turned this deep orange and then purple. We were just sitting around the fire, talking quietly, watching the kids try to catch fireflies with their little hands. That's when I first noticed it. The woods got quiet. I don't mean it got a little quieter. I mean it went completely silent. 1 minute you could hear the crickets, the little rustles in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl. The next minute, it was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the entire forest. It was an absolute dead silence. It was so sudden, it made the hair on my arms stand up. My wife noticed it too. She stopped talking mid-sentence and just looked at me, her eyes wide. We didn't say anything. We just listened to nothing. That's when we heard the footsteps. They were slow, heavy. Each one was a distinct thump, thump, thump from the direction of the ridge. It wasn't the light, skittering sound of a deer or a raccoon. This was something with real weight, something big. Each step had a solid, deliberate quality to it, like whatever it was. It wasn't in a hurry. It was just walking, and it was on 2 feet. I know what a bear sounds like on 4 legs, this shuffling, rolling gait. This was different. This was a bipedal walk, left foot, right foot, thump, thump, thump. I looked at my watch. It was just after 9 p.m. The last of the twilight was gone and it was full dark, with a bright, nearly full moon starting to rise over the ridge. The kids, thank God, were starting to get tired and were already inside the trailer, probably half asleep. My wife's hand found mine, and she was gripping it so hard her knuckles were white. We were both frozen, just staring up at the black line of the trees on the ridge, listening to this thing walk along it. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt cold all over, despite the warmth from the fire. This wasn't curiosity. This was a deep, primal fear. The kind that sits in the base of your skull and tells you that you are not at the top of the food chain. "Get the big flashlight," my wife whispered, her voice tight. I nodded, my movements stiff. I kept my eyes on the ridge as I fumbled for the heavy-duty maglite we keep in a bin by the trailer door. My hands were shaking. I finally got it and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, a solid white column of light. I swept it across the base of the ridge, then slowly moved it upwards, over the rocks and the first line of trees. I saw nothing, just trees and shadows. The footsteps had stopped. For a second I felt a stupid little flicker of relief. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it was just a moose or something, and it had moved on. I kept the beam moving, my arm feeling like lead. Then I panned the light a little higher, towards a bare, rocky outcrop about 150 yards away, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, and that's when I saw it. It was standing there, just standing, completely motionless. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. It was built like a powerlifter, but taller and broader. Its body was a solid, dark shape, blacker than the shadows around it. It was covered in what looked like shaggy, dark hair, but it was so dark it was hard to tell. It was just this immense, powerful silhouette, standing on 2 legs on the ridge, looking down at our camp. I couldn't breathe. My lungs just locked up. I was holding the flashlight beam right on it, and it didn't move. It was like a statue. The sheer size of it was staggering. It was so big it made the trees next to it look smaller. Then it turned its head. It wasn't a quick animal movement. It was a slow, deliberate turn, like a person would do. It turned its head and looked directly into the beam of my flashlight. And its eyes. They reflected the light. Not like a cat's eyes, all bright and glowing. This was different. It was a faint, dull, red-orange glow, deep set under a heavy brow. They weren't shining. They were just catching the light. And in that faint glow, I could feel its gaze. It was intelligent. It was watching us. It wasn't just looking in our direction, it was studying us. It knew we were there. It had been watching us the whole time. I felt a chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. This wasn't an animal that had stumbled upon us. This was something that had been observing us. It made a sound then, a low, deep breath. It wasn't a growl. It was more like a sigh, but heavy and wet, like air being pushed out of a massive set of lungs. The sound carried down to us clearly in the silent air. Hoo! That sound, more than anything, is what made me freeze solid. It was a sound of consideration, of assessment. My brain was screaming at me to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. All I could do was stare at this giant dark form standing on the ridge, its faintly glowing eyes locked on me. My wife's grip on my hand was the only thing that felt real. Then a thought, clear and sharp as broken glass, cut through the panic. The light! I'm pissing it off. I'm challenging it. I had this sudden, terrifying conviction that if I kept the light on it, it would come down the hill, right for us. My thumb fumbled for the switch. I clicked the flashlight off. The darkness was instantaneous and absolute. For a second, I was blind. My eyes struggled to adjust. The moon provided some light, but the ridge was now just a black shape against a slightly less black sky. I couldn't see the creature anymore, but I knew it was still there. I could feel it. We stood there by the dead fire, not moving, barely breathing. The silence pressed in on us. A minute passed, then another. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. My wife was trembling beside me. We waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. It felt like an hour. There were no more footsteps, no more sounds. Nothing. Is it gone? My wife whispered, her voice so quiet, I almost didn't hear it. I don't know. I breathed back. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring into the darkness, trying to see any movement, listening for any sound. There was nothing. The forest was still dead silent. Finally, I moved. My legs were stiff. We need to get inside. Now. We didn't say another word. We scrambled for the trailer. I remember my hand slipping on the metal door handle because it was so sweaty. We got inside, and I locked the door, then checked the locks on all the windows. The kids were asleep in their bunk. We climbed into our bed, but we didn't get undressed. We just lay there in the dark, fully clothed, listening. We didn't sleep, not a wink. Every little noise from outside, the creak of a tree, the rustle of a leaf, made us jump. We were both straining our ears, waiting to hear those heavy footsteps again, waiting for them to get closer. My mind was racing, imagining that massive shape emerging from the trees, right outside the thin metal walls of the trailer. I've never felt so vulnerable. A trailer door isn't going to stop something that big. We both knew it. The night dragged on. The moon crossed the sky. Eventually, the black outside the windows turned to dark blue, then grey. The sun was coming up. With the dawn, some of the fear receded. The normal sounds of the forest started up again. Birds chirping, squirrels chattering. It felt a little safer, but the memory of what we saw was burned into my mind. I knew I had to go up there. I had to see the spot. My wife begged me not to. "Just pack up and let's go," she said, her face pale. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to have some kind of proof for myself that I wasn't going crazy. I waited until the sun was fully up, casting long, sharp shadows through the trees. I grabbed a knife, more for psychological comfort than anything else, and I started walking towards the base of the ridge. The climb was steep and awkward. My heart was thumping again, but now it was a mix of residual fear and a grim determination. It took me a while to find the exact spot. I was looking for the rocky outcrop I'd seen in the flashlight beam. When I finally found it, I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The ground was different here. The moss and low-growing plants were crushed, and they were crushed in a pattern, not a messy, rolled-around spot like a deer bed. This was a series of impressions. They were huge, longer than my boot, and shaped vaguely like a giant human foot, but wider, and they were spaced about 5 feet apart. 5 feet. That's a long stride, a walking stride. I followed the impressions with my eyes. They led right up to the edge of the outcrop, the exact place where I'd seen it standing. I walked over to the edge and looked down. The view was perfect. I could see our entire campsite clearly. The trailer, the fire pit, the folding chairs. I could see the path to the outhouse, everything. It was the perfect vantage point. It had been standing right here in the dark, watching us eat our dinner, watching our kids play. The thought made my skin crawl. That's when I saw the branch. A tree limb, about as thick as my wrist, was snapped off a nearby pine tree. It wasn't old and weathered. The break was fresh. The wood inside was still pale and wet with sap. It was snapped clean off, about 7 feet off the ground. It looked like something had just reached up and broken it without any effort. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the crushed plants, the snapped branch, and the clear, unobstructed view of our camp. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. Something had been up here. Something big, something heavy. Something that walked on 2 legs and watched us from the shadows. I didn't need to see anything else. I turned around and practically ran back down the hill. When I got back to the trailer, my wife took one look at my face and started packing without a word. We woke the kids, told them we were leaving early, and in less than 20 minutes, we had everything thrown in the trailer, and we were bouncing down the dirt road, leaving that place behind. We never went back to that spot. I've read other accounts since then, stories from other people in Oregon who've seen something similar, a big, dark figure watching from a ridge, just observing before it vanishes. They call it Sasquatch. I don't know what to call it. All I know is what I saw, what I heard, and what I found on that ridge. It was real. It was intelligent, and it was watching us. That feeling of being studied, of being completely exposed to something you can't understand, is something I'll never forget. I still can't explain it. I just know it happened. Story 17. All right, I'll just type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out of my head. It's been 3 weeks, and I still can't sleep for more than a couple hours without jolting awake, my heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to escape. I keep the lights on in my apartment now. I used to love the dark. It was a Tuesday, the 2nd week of October. The weather was this perfect, crisp kind of autumn day in Oregon, where the sun is warm on your skin, but the air has that bite to it that tells you winter's not far off. I'd taken a personal day from work. My head was just full of noise, deadlines, office politics, just the usual garbage, and I needed to clear it out. I've always done that by hiking. Usually, I stick to the more popular trails near Mount Hood. But that day, I wanted real solitude. I looked online and found this trail that was supposed to be less traveled. It was an old logging road that had been reclaimed by the forest, not even properly maintained by the Park Service anymore. Just a thin line on a map. That was my first mistake, I guess, thinking that empty was the same as peaceful. The drive out there was longer than I thought. The paved road turned to gravel, and then the gravel turned to this rough, potholed dirt track that wound deep into the coastal range. My little sedan bottomed out a couple times, and I remember feeling a twinge of anxiety about getting a flat tire out here with no cell service. But I pushed on, the stubborn part of me not wanting to waste the trip. When I finally found the trailhead, it was just a small pull-off area with space for maybe 2 cars. Mine was the only one. Perfect, I thought, just what I wanted. I got my gear together, my day pack with water, some jerky and an apple, a basic first aid kit, a compass, even though I had the trail map on my phone, and this loud, P-less whistle I've had since I was a kid in Scouts. I remember looking at the whistle and almost leaving it behind. It seemed so silly, but I clipped it to the outside of my pack anyway, a force of habit. The forest swallowed me the second I stepped off the road. The air changed. It got cooler, damper, and the light turned a deep, greenish gold, filtering down through a canopy of huge Douglas firs and cedars. The trail wasn't a trail so much as a suggestion of a path covered in a thick carpet of pine needles and moss. It was quiet, not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, waiting quiet. The only sounds were my own breathing and the soft crunch of my boots. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, that stupid, primal feeling of being watched. I shook it off. I told myself it was just because I was alone, because the forest was so dense. I've hiked alone 100 times. This was no different. I walked for about an hour, maybe a bit more. The trail started to climb, following a ridgeline. I was starting to feel good, the tightness in my shoulders beginning to ease. And then I heard the first rock. It wasn't a loud sound, it was a soft thud, like a fist-sized stone landing on soft earth. It came from my left, maybe 30-40 feet away, deep in the trees. I stopped dead. My first thought was, another hiker, maybe someone throwing a rock for a dog. But there was no one. The sound had come from a patch of salal and fern so thick you couldn't see 2 feet into it. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing, just the wind sighing in the tops of the trees. I shrugged, feeling a little stupid, and kept walking. 5 minutes later, another one. This one was closer. Crack! It hit a tree trunk. My heart did a little stutter step. That was no accident. Something was throwing rocks, a person messing with me. My mind raced. But why? There was no one else here. I felt a cold trickle of sweat run down my spine. I picked up my pace, my boots now making too much noise on the forest floor. I was trying to listen, but all I could hear was the blood pulsing in my ears. Then came the big one. I heard a whistle in the air, a sharp, cutting sound, and a rock the size of a cantaloupe slammed into the ground maybe 10 feet to my right. It hit with so much force it dug a small crater in the moss and sent a spray of dirt and needles into the air. I actually yelped, a short, sharp sound of pure shock. That wasn't a warning shot, that was meant to hit me. My head snapped toward the direction it came from, and that's when I saw it. It was leaning out from behind the massive, gnarled trunk of an old cedar tree. It was a kid. That was my first insane thought. It looked like a kid, but a nightmare version of one. It was probably 6 feet tall, but it looked young. Its body was bulky, not like a bodybuilder, but thick and powerful, like a gorilla. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't black like in the movies. It was a reddish brown, like rust or dried blood, and it was long and shaggy. Its face, God, its face. It was dark, leathery skin around the eyes and mouth, and its eyes were forward-facing like a person's. They were a deep, intelligent brown, and they were locked directly onto mine. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. There was no curiosity in its gaze. It was a flat, predatory stare. It was assessing me. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, see the muscles in its shoulders bunching. It wasn't hiding, it was just watching me, one long arm braced against the tree trunk. Then it moved. It didn't roar. It didn't make a sound. It just pushed off from the tree and came for me. Its run was nothing like a human's. It was a loping, powerful stride, its arms swinging, its body low to the ground. It was fast, unbelievably fast. And as it ran, its mouth opened, and I saw its teeth. They weren't giant fangs, but they were big, blocky, and yellowed, and the sight of them, just those teeth in that dark mouth, sent a bolt of pure, undiluted terror through me that I have never felt before and hope to never feel again. I didn't think. I just ran. I turned and sprinted back down the trail, my pack bouncing wildly on my back. I'm not a fast runner, but fear gave me wings. I could hear it behind me, the heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of its feet hitting the ground. It was gaining on me. I risked a glance over my shoulder and wished I hadn't. It was maybe 50 feet back, eating up the distance with those terrifying loping strides. Its eyes were still fixed on me, and the rocks kept coming. Not from it, but from the trees around us. I heard them whipping through the air, smacking into tree trunks and thudding into the ground around my feet. It was herding me. Something else was out there, in the woods, and it was working with this thing, or it was its parent, and they were trying to corner me. The thought made me whimper as I ran. The trail broke into a small clearing, a sunny patch maybe 50 yards across. There was no cover. I was a sitting duck. I had to get across it. I poured on every last bit of speed I had, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I was halfway across when a rock, bigger than my fist, whipped past my head so close I felt the wind of it. It slammed into a stump in front of me with a sickening crack. I was sobbing now, pure, snotty, terrified tears. I couldn't outrun it. It was going to catch me in this clearing. This was it. My mind was just a screaming blank. And then I remembered the whistle. My hand fumbled for the outside of my pack, my fingers numb and clumsy. I couldn't find it. I was patting the nylon, my vision blurry, the thumping footsteps getting louder. My fingers closed around the cold metal. I ripped it from its clip, shoved it in my mouth, and blew with every ounce of air left in my burning lungs. The sound was piercing, a single, sharp, ear-splitting shriek that cut through the forest silence. And the running stopped, just like that. The heavy thump, thump, thump ceased. I skidded to a halt at the edge of the clearing, my body trembling so hard I could barely stand. I turned around, the whistle still gripped in my hand. It had stopped about 20 yards into the clearing. It was standing upright, its head tilted. It wasn't looking at me with rage anymore. It looked confused, annoyed. It brought one of its huge, long-fingered hands up to its ear and shook its head, like a dog trying to get water out. The sound had hurt it. It had actually hurt it. We stood there for another frozen moment. It took a step forward, but it was hesitant now. It let out a sound, a low, guttural grunt that seemed to vibrate in my own chest. It wasn't a roar. It was a communication. I didn't wait to see if it was calling for its mom. I dove off the trail, scrambling on my hands and knees into a jumble of large, moss-covered basalt rocks that had tumbled down the hillside. I squeezed myself into a narrow gap between two of the biggest ones, pulling my knees to my chest, making myself as small as possible. I held my breath. I could smell the damp earth and my own sour sweat. I could hear my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. I listened. For a long time, there was nothing, just the wind. Then I heard it, a slow, heavy tread. Crunch, crunch, crunch. On the pine needles, it was walking past my hiding spot. I could see a sliver of the clearing through a crack in the rocks. It moved into my line of sight. It wasn't running anymore. It was walking slowly, its head swinging from side to side, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. It was looking for me. It passed within 15 feet of my rock. I could see the individual muscles moving under its reddish coat, see the power in its shoulders. It was so much bigger up close. It paused right there and let out that low grunt again. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a god I hadn't talked to in years. I felt a warm trickle down my leg. I'd piss myself. I didn't even care. The footsteps started again, moving away, back down the trail the way we had come. I stayed in that hole for what felt like an hour, maybe more. I didn't move a muscle until the cramps in my legs became unbearable. The forest had gone quiet again, the heavy, waiting quiet. Slowly, painfully, I unfolded myself from the rocks. Every joint ached. I was shaking so badly I had to lean against the boulder to stay upright. I looked around. Nothing. The clearing was empty. The trail was empty. I knew I couldn't go forward. My car was back at the trailhead. I had to go back the way I came, the way it had gone. The thought made me want to vomit. I started walking. I didn't run. I walked as quietly as I could, my eyes scanning every shadow, every thicket. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I was backtracking, following our frantic footsteps from the chase, a path of scuffed earth and broken ferns. It was the longest walk of my life. Every 10 steps, I'd stop and listen, my hand clenched around the whistle in my pocket. The sun was getting low, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The green-gold light was turning a deep, ominous orange. I was almost there. I could see the break in the trees that meant the road. I broke into a stumbling, exhausted run. I burst out of the tree line, and there it was, my stupid, beautiful, beat-up sedan. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could get the door unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and hit the locks. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, my entire body convulsing with tremors. I couldn't get a full breath. I started the car, the engine sounding obscenely loud, and I peeled out of that pull-off, spraying gravel, driving too fast down that terrible dirt road, bottoming out the car over and over, not caring, just needing to put miles between me and that place. I didn't stop shaking until I hit the pavement. I pulled over at the first gas station I saw, the one with the bright fluorescent lights, and I just sat in my car and cried. I cried like a little kid, great, heaving sobs of relief and residual terror. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been hiking since. I look at the woods outside of town now, and I don't see peace or beauty. I see a place where things that shouldn't exist do. I see those forward-facing eyes, that loping run, those teeth. I keep the whistle on my nightstand now. I still can't sleep. The doctor gave me pills, but they don't help much. How do you explain that you're not afraid of the dark? You're afraid of what was in it that one Tuesday afternoon, that you weren't just scared, you were hunted, and you only got away because of a stupid plastic whistle from your childhood. I look at maps sometimes, at that thin line in the coastal range, and I wonder if it's still out there, and I wonder what it was trying to tell the others with that low, guttural grunt. Story 18. Okay. So I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I've never posted anything like this before, but after what happened, I can't stop thinking about it. I'm just a regular guy. I work in IT, love hiking, and camping's been my escape since I was a kid. But this messed me up. I'm still shaky writing this, and it's been a few weeks. I was camping with some friends near Sabbath Day Point in the Lake George area. We'd been planning this trip for months, just a bunch of us getting away from the city, you know? The usual. Beers, campfires, stupid jokes. Nothing out of the ordinary. That day started like any other camping day. We got there in the afternoon, set up our tents in this clearing surrounded by thick woods. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and the lake was just a short walk away, all calm and peaceful. We spent the evening cooking hot dogs, telling stories, and laughing about nothing. I remember feeling totally relaxed, like the world was miles away. We crashed around 11, all zipped up in our sleeping bags, the kind of tired that comes from fresh air and too much junk food. I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, not sure why. Maybe I had to pee, or maybe it was just one of those random wake-ups. But I remembered I needed to make a phone call. My sister was going through some stuff, and I'd promised to check in, but with the spotty service out there, I figured I'd try when it was quiet. So I unzipped my sleeping bag, trying not to wake my friends. The tent was dark, and I could hear them snoring softly. I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside. The cold hit me right away. It was that deep, damp cold that seeps into your bones. And the air was so still it felt heavy. The moon was out, but it was just a sliver, so everything was shadows upon shadows. I had my phone in my hand, and I walked about 40 feet away from the tent to where I'd gotten a bar of service earlier. I leaned against a tree, my breath making little clouds in the air, and dialed my sister's number. It rang a couple times before she picked up, and we talked for a bit. Just normal stuff. How she was doing if she needed anything. I kept my voice low, not wanting to disturb the silence. I finished the call at 3:48. I remember glancing at my phone because the screen lit up the dark, and I saw the time. Everything was fine up to that point. I felt a little chilled, but nothing weird. Then I decided to head to the bathroom. We'd set up a makeshift one about 100 feet away, just a pit toilet we'd dug. I started walking, my footsteps crunching lightly on the fallen leaves. The woods were dead quiet, no owls, no rustling, just this eerie stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I've camped a lot, so I know normal night sounds, but this was different. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I was maybe 20 feet from the tent when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, movement on the hill to my left. The hill wasn't steep, more of a gentle slope covered in trees and underbrush. At first, I thought it was a bear. We'd seen signs of them around and my mind went there automatically. It was big and dark, shuffling up the incline, but then it turned, not like a bear would. Bears move kind of clumsily, you know. This was smooth, almost graceful, and when it turned, I saw its face. It was human-like, not fully human, but close enough to make my stomach drop. Covered in dark, matted hair, but the shape was all wrong for an animal. The eyes, I couldn't see them clearly, but they seemed to catch what little light there was, and they were set in a face that had structure, like a person's. It wasn't a snout, it was flatter, with a nose and a mouth that looked almost like it could talk. The whole thing was huge, way bigger than a man, but it moved with this confidence, like it owned the place. It didn't hurry or stumble. It just kept walking up the hill, its arms swinging naturally. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that. They don't have faces that look almost human. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a second, maybe 5, but it felt like forever. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs were locked. I could smell something then, a weird mix of wet dog and earth, like something had been rolling in the mud. The figure was maybe 50 feet away, and it didn't seem to notice me at first, but then it paused and its head tilted slightly, as if it was listening. I swear, I felt its attention on me, like a weight. That's when the fear really kicked in. Not just scare, but deep, primal terror, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your breath catch. I turned and ran. I didn't think, I just bolted back toward the tent. My feet slipped on the leaves and I almost fell, but I kept going, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I burst into the tent, zipping it shut so fast I fumbled with the zipper. My friends woke up, groggy and confused. One of them sat up, rubbing his eyes, and asked what was wrong. I was panting, my hands shaking, and I just blurted out that I saw something. They laughed it off at first, said it was probably a bear or a deer, that I was spooked from being out in the dark, but I couldn't stop shaking. I told them it wasn't a bear, it was too big, too human-like. They dismissed it, told me to go back to sleep, that I was imagining things, but I knew what I saw. We stayed up for a bit after that, them half asleep and me wide awake, staring at the tent wall. Every little sound outside made me jump. A twig snapping, the wind rustling leaves. I kept replaying it in my head, that smooth walk, the way it turned, the face. It wasn't bulky like a bear. It was leaner in a way, but massive. The arms were long, and it moved like it was on 2 feet without any effort. I've seen videos of Bigfoot or whatever, but I never believed in that stuff. Now, I don't know. This felt real, too real. As the sky started to lighten around 5 or so, we got up. My friends were still joking about it, but I could see they were a little uneasy too. We packed up early, none of us saying much. The woods that had felt so inviting the day before now seemed menacing. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. On the drive home, I kept quiet, just staring out the window. My mind was racing. What was that thing? Why was it there? I've gone over it 1,000 times since then, and I can't explain it. It wasn't a person in a costume who would be out there at almost 4 in the morning, walking up a hill like that. And it wasn't an animal I've ever seen or heard of. The worst part is that brief, clear view. In the dark, with just enough light to make out shapes, I saw it perfectly. It's burned into my memory. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or I was half asleep. But I was awake. I'd just been on the phone. I know what I saw, and that fear hasn't left me. I used to love the wilderness, felt safe in it. Now I get nervous when I'm alone outside at night. I keep expecting to see it again, that figure moving in the shadows. I've looked up stories online, and there are others who've seen similar things in that area. Bigfoot sightings, they call them. I never paid much attention before, but now I don't know what to think. All I know is that something was out there, something that shouldn't exist, and it saw me, or I think it did. That moment when it turned, it felt like it knew I was there. I'll never forget that, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting,